Yeah.
When you change this, you don't have to say
It really upsets me, but I handle it. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the last council meeting of the century. I will call our meeting to order. It is the decade. Oh, the century. The decade. The century. Welcome to the last meeting of the decade. Let's redo that. I will call our meeting to order for 10 a.m. on the 10th of December, 2019, and recognize that we're conducting our business today in Laureate territory. I would ask first, please, for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And we have some minutes from the regular council meeting held this November 26th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thanks. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Yes.
I just have a question. You might not have noticed this. I wasn't the one absent, but we used to list members not in attendance as with regrets or something like that. And I'm just wondering, absent just sounds a bit more like you just didn't show up. Anyways, when did that change?
At least do you recall what our custom used to be, or if it...
In my time, it has been absent, but
Right.
it's not set in stone.
It's not a big deal.
Okay.
I
Thanks for pointing it out. I think we'll, unless anyone has super strong feelings, leave it as is. Absent is absent. All right. Any other notes from the agenda? Or sorry, the minutes. Okay. All in favor of the minutes? Thank you. Motion carried. We didn't have anybody sign up for public comment on the agenda. Thank you. So we will move right into the mayor's report. And I have two things. So first of all, last Saturday was the annual Tofino Volunteer Fire Department Christmas party. And they give out the annual Firefighter of the Year award. And this year, I'm really pleased to say that it was Dwayne Bell who was the recipient of the annual Firefighter Award of the Year award. And this is an award that is, it is his own peers that elect him or choose him to be that. And so there's some really beautiful words said about him and just how much he gives back to the fire department in terms of the work that he does with their nonprofit society and the work there. And then just always the guy who's there to help organize the kind of the fun stuff, you know, the parties and the camaraderie and all of the work that he does. And I know that Dwayne's efforts are really appreciated by all of the firefighters. So I want to pass on my congratulations to Dwayne, and I'm sure that is on behalf of council as well. And say congratulations to the Volunteer Fire Department for another really successful year. So also this being the last council meeting of the decade, not the century, but the decade. And moving into the holiday season and everything, I really think this is an appropriate time to say thank you to our staff. And it's something that I don't think we do enough, to commend you and say thank you for all of the incredibly hard work that you do in our part. So we're the people who sit here at the table and make the decisions, but our staff are the folks who make this town work in and out every single day, from fixing fire hydrants and storm drains to potholes and all kinds of other stuff, but really big stuff as well. So to Bob, to you, your managers, and all of your staff, I want to say on behalf of council, thank you very much for all of the hard work that you do. It does not go unnoticed. Okay, those are my announcements. And so we are going to move into our delegations, and our first one is from the Tofino Poet Laureate Working Group. Really looking forward to this. So come on up. We've got Helen. Are you doing most of the speaking, Helen?
I am.
Don't say that so disappointingly. We look forward to it.
Excitedly.
So we have, you have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, and we have a little timer on the wall there. And if we get close, then I'll just give a quick little indication. And if you need more time, we can consider that. But we'll have some time for questions afterwards. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. How do I use this amazing thing?
So just these buttons go over, so put that one to the next slide, and then if you hold that bottom one, that's your pointer. So you hold that and point to the screen.
Thank you. Probably don't need an IQ over 50 for that. Mayor Osborne and councillors, thank you very much for making time to consider our delegation from the Poet Laureate, Tofino Poet Laureate Working Group, which I'll refer to as the working group for the rest of this morning. We really appreciate you taking the time to hear the delegation, but also for your support over the last almost 2 years with the Inaugural Poet Laureate program. So know that as we work through. And I have regrets from Joanna Streetley, our Poet Laureate, who wasn't able to attend today due to work commitments, and also Chris Lowther. But most of our working group is here, which is just wonderful. Okay, let's see if she can do this. Yeah, we're not going to list the incredible number of outputs from the Poet Laureate, just a few examples from year 2, because she has exceeded far the expectations for the agreement set up with the District of Tofino and the Poet Laureate program. So some of her outputs in 2019 include the Before the Road publication, which, as you probably well know, the publication is now in the museum. And Tom Cooley and Alan Crow Swords worked with students from grade 9 in Ucluelet and also from the Hartwood students grade 3 to 7. They, the elders told their stories about what Tofino was like before the road, what Clapwood was like, and the students wrote poems and presented those poems. And the working group has put that into a publication that's available for sale. We've sold out with the first lot, so we're on to the next lot of publications with that. So that's been a really important combining community type initiative, combining generations, age groups, and cultural groups, a really exciting part of the program. There was the Gust of Wind open mic at the Village Green in July, and New Zealand poets as well as local poets presented their work on the open mic. Expressions of Nature was when the Poet Laureate combined her poetry with music for the press celebrations. There's also been a number of council events. The Poet Laureate wrote and presented a poem to you honouring the death of Councillor Beard. And you last year would have been read the inaugural poem and presented with a copy of that. Councillor Law didn't miss out on that. One night with a new moon recently, a flashmob arrived at his door with a town crier and the Poet Laureate, and they read the poem to him in the moonlight and gave him his copy. So that's one of the most recent inauguration activities. Just going back a step. The Poet Laureate's done readings this week in Nanaimo, and she's been doing poetry readings in Tofino, so that's putting Tofino on the map. And on Friday, certainly the Poet Laureate is even seeing the poetry evening at the Tofino Gardens. So I think we can all be really proud of the number of outputs that have happened only this year and also last year. So I think this shows, she does 3 clicks, that the current Poet Laureate has aptly demonstrated how a Poet Laureate actually enriches our community, whether we're poets or not. And she does this, or any Poet Laureate would do this, by recognising key community events with poems, celebrating local poets as well as regional poets, putting our name out there, our being certainly Tofino and Clapwood, encouraging emerging poets in a range of groups and sectors, and bridging cultural groups and generations. So we applaud the district for supporting the program thus far and having such a rich program come out of it. It's important to note too that the Poet Laureate program to date has been aligned with the Arts, Culture and Heritage Vision and Action Plan. So it's very much in line with what's happening in Tofino, and this has been quite a deliberate move with that. As you well know, the Arts, Culture and Heritage Vision is about celebrating our cultural assets, which are arts, culture, heritage, and also celebrating First Nations offerings. And this has certainly been some of the points in the action plan for arts, culture and heritage to encourage local and regional inclusiveness. And I think the Poet Laureate has shown that with her work. To strengthen innovation and resiliency. And some of us who are starting to be emerging poets are learning how to be resilient, without a doubt. And engagement in and with the community. And anyone who was on the First Street dock last year when the boys from the pits were missing and heard the Poet Laureate read the poem that she wrote for that night will have a real sense of how she has brought community together and acknowledged really key events. So our current agreement is the appointment of a Poet Laureate on a biannual basis, with that Poet Laureate starting on the 1st of May. And the District of Tofino has been generous in providing $2,500 each year, matched by $2,500 from the Poet Laureate working group. The program, of course, is always contingent on finding a suitable Poet Laureate, but we have so much richness in this community, I doubt that will ever be an issue. The Poet Laureate Working Group has certainly matched the $2,500 fundraising that the district's provided. In 2018 it was almost $3,000. In 2019, thanks to 3 really committed fundraisers, was over $4,000. However, the Poet Laureate Working Group's required to match that district's contribution really early in the summer, in May, June. And as you all know, this is a time when local businesses are already committed often to community donations. Businesses are under intense pressure with increased tourists coming into town, and they have little certainty of their annual income. So we found that very challenging, particularly this year, to go out and ask people, potential donors, for money at that time of the year. So some of the solutions that we can see is that the Poet Laureate Working Group wants to develop a longer term fundraising plan and leverage with more certainty of district support beyond a single year. Financial certainty across a longer period would permit fundraising throughout the year. And the fundraising we have planned at the moment is an extension of our current activities, showcasing Before the Road, the original publication, on the Claquet Writing Group lectern in businesses, rented out to businesses for 12 months, for 1 month, to showcase that publication and sell the books with it, and the sale of greeting cards. The other thing that the working group would like to do is plan fundraising, approaching potential donors across the year, not just in May and June when everyone's in a frenetic state. And that would allow more reasoned and more planned fundraising. So for us, financial certainty across more than 1 year would be really key to being able to have planned longer term fundraising and be more supportive. It would also cut down volunteer burnout, which, as we all know, in a small community, it becomes a big issue. The other part of the solution that we'd like to talk with you about is that the district currently provides some administrative support along with the Pacific Rim Arts Society. If we had more administrative support from within the district, it would create a more local presence and align with other district-supported groups, for example, the Arts, Culture, Heritage. And it would enable a more streamlined program administration. That wouldn't exclude press. Press would still play a key role, but it would make good sense to be able to have the administration in Tofino. So our request to you, and we applaud and thank you for your work thus far, is a 4-year commitment from the district, in line with other groups, I believe, so that the district could provide annual funding of $2,500 per year, matched with funding from the Poet Laureate Working Group. And I think we've demonstrated that we can provide that funding to match and more. And that the district would be prepared to administer the Tofino Poet Laureate program with support, ongoing support from the Poet Laureate Working Group. And our hope is that we can continue to work together on what is a really exciting journey that is setting Tofino on the map in terms of poetry and art. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you very much. We'll ask council if you have any questions or discussion, and then we can talk about next steps. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. And I do recognize the great work that this program and the group and the Board of Laureate has brought to the community. My question is, what does administrative support involve? What exactly is it?
As we see, it would be a continuation of what's happening with the district helping with meeting support, and meetings are 3 times a year, and managing the funding, as in receiving monies and holding them for us. I don't believe, and your staff may well want to talk to that, but it's going to be a lot more work than now. It will just be more consolidated, more efficient.
Okay, thanks.
Did you want to make any comments on that?
So the Poet Laureate Working Group, staff has been involved in that for the last 2 years. Currently, the administration of the program is with Pacific Rim Art Society. So the Poet Laureate, the contract that they have is with CRAS, and CRAS accepts donations and issues taxable receipts? Tax receipts, thank you, on behalf of those donations. So the district would take that on if we were to administer the program. So there would be some staff time involved in that, but because we've been involved so far, I think it would be fairly seamless.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Questions for Helen? Councillor Steer?
No, I was just
Okay.
Councillor Anderson asked the question. That was on the table.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Congratulations on a really successful year and a succinct and clear presentation. I really appreciated that. And I think if you want to have a seat, that's fine. And then we'll just talk really briefly about what we want to do next and how we want to handle that. So thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks to your audience. Okay, so I think what would be great is just to have a short discussion about how, if you're inclined to support the request, and then we'll ask our staff to bring a report back, and I'll ask you maybe right now about timing, like does that go with budget, or?
I think that would be the most appropriate thing to do, is to refer to the budget process, and if council wishes, we can give it early consideration, so that we're not waiting until April.
Okay,
to
all right.
let these folks know the outcome.
Thank you. So,
I'm happy to refer it to the budget process. I know for myself I would only agree for a 3-year term for the length of this council, so rather than lumbering the next council with a 4th year sort of thing, so I would propose a 3-year term.
okay, are there any thoughts? No final decisions being made today, but.
I'll second that.
Well, it's not a motion yet,
No.
but. Okay. So my perspective is why I would support a 4-year term is I actually think it's good to take it 1 year into the next council term, because when you've got a new council that's dealing with a lot of things, to bring on a brand new project and provide that kind of uncertainty to the Poet Laureate Working Group at that point is challenging. Because the Poet Laureate is 2 years at a time as well, that's a bit disjointed with the period of their term, so they could only offer a 1-year contract to the Poet Laureate if they only have certainty of 1 year. That makes sense to me. So you're looking at it as a budget. Things to think about again, and I just wanted to get a sense from everybody right now, kind of where you were thinking. But
Most certainly supportive of continuing on with the 4-year
yeah.
cycle, which,
Okay.
as the request was.
So if we could then refer the request to the budget process and ask staff to come back to council with early consideration of that request, I think that would be appropriate. Okay. All right, so I'll make that motion. You will second? Okay, thank you. Is everybody clear? All right. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Thanks very much. All right. Thanks, Erin. You're welcome to stay for the whole rest of the meeting. But I have a feeling you won't.
Are there more carols?
Yeah. No, there are no more carols. The carols are over. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We do have a second delegation from Bob Hansen, but I don't see Bob here today. So we will
He sent me an email
skip
this
that.
morning.
Pardon me?
He sent me an email this morning.
Okay.
So perhaps
Maybe
just
some
running late.
confusion with the start time, but. All right, well, that's okay. We'll just move on then to the correspondence section of our agenda. And we have 2 letters, both from provincial MLAs and parliamentary secretaries at that. So the first being a letter from Sheila Malcolmson, who is the Parliamentary Secretary for Environment, with an update on the progress she's made in her file on advising the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy on marine plastics and abandoned vessels. Did anyone have any questions or anything that came out of that? It's nice to see that they know a Tofino, local Tofino groups and the work that people have been doing here in Clayoquot Sound in this area. It's really nice to see. And then the second letter is a follow-up letter from Jennifer Rice, who is the Parliamentary Secretary for Emergency Preparedness, regarding our meeting that we had with her at UBCM. And once again, I just have to say, I think part of the success of that meeting, and you can see it in this letter, is really the hard work that our staff does. And so just a shout out to Keith and all the work he does as our emergency preparedness coordinator. He really helped me at least prepare for this meeting, and I know a number of others of us as well. Any questions that came out of that letter?
Not so much a question, I mean, as much as I appreciated the feedback, I have to admit I was a little disappointed in the letter in terms of the Tsunami Smart and kind of the lack of support. And encouraging the local authorities to adopt the best practices from other tsunami programs. I thought I would have liked to have seen a little more support from the hard work that Keith has already put in. And so that was my only, and so in response back, thank you. And maybe we might revisit this again and have a further conversation on how the province might be able to further support us in this program.
Agreed. We have to keep pushing.
I have
Councillor Chalmers?
quite a few notes on it.
Okay.
And I did end up meeting with Keith about it.
Yeah.
I felt like there was a lot of lip service, and I have, Keith and I ended up going through sort of 3 points. And one of the big things that came out of the letter was that they're like, we're encouraging local authorities and First Nations to adopt best practices, but we need standards. And I just took a course this weekend on incident command systems, which is about having the same terminology among everything. So if each community is developing their own program, there's going to be no helping each other, like following the same thing. So I think I would really like to see a response to the letter, reiterating that that's not what we asked for. What we're asking for is usually the way in standards. So that's on one point of it. I also found, there was some support about working on a working group, and I'd like to see us respond back being like, yes, let's do this, and just make sure it doesn't kind of get dropped off amongst the First Nations and various communities. And then also, in the Emergency Preparedness Act, it doesn't really address tsunamis, it's more about flooding and fires. So reiterating that if you're requiring us to be responsible for all this, then we need to see that in the Act as well. So if it's the will of council, I'd like to see a response to this letter.
Thanks, that's really great. With respect to the Emergency Preparedness Act and the fact that they're doing a review of the Act right now, I was contacted by Kate Moran from the Ocean Networks Canada, and she asked specifically, would the District of Tofino be interested in collaborating on a response in just that point about there is a strong focus on flood and fire and not enough emphasis on coastal hazards and the emergency preparedness, that's the special type of preparedness that's required in response for tsunami and earthquake threat. So that is something that she is going to bring a draft forward to me in January, and so I'll bring it to you as council, and I think that's something we really want to consider. And then with respect to writing a response to the Parliamentary Secretary, I think that's entirely appropriate, and just reiterating again our recommendations and continuing to push, to your point, Councillor Steer. So if you want to go ahead and make a motion to that, we can do so.
Sure. So would it be to direct staff? I can work with staff or direct staff. Any recommendations on motion? Sorry.
That's okay.
I make a motion to work with staff to write a response to the letter.
Sure. To write a response to Parliamentary Secretary Rice, reiterating Tofino's recommendations regarding emergency preparedness and the Provincial Tsunami Program.
Thank you. I will make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Steer. Any questions about that? Well, okay, all in favor? Thank you, not opposed, motion carried. Great, thanks very much everyone. so our first staff report that we're going to consider today is the development variance permit at 1237 Howard Drive. And this is the one that had 3 items that were attached late, correct? Yeah.
I'm going to
So-
declare a conflict of interest
Okay,
due to living on Howard Drive
okay.
and friends of the applicants.
All right, understood, and thank you. All right, Peter.
I'm going to apologize, I have a bit of a sore throat, so there's a bunch of reports coming from me, so if I have to stop.
Do you have a glass of water?
I have some, thanks, but I just want
Okay.
to mention that might happen along the way. So the first report, first application for consideration is a development variance permit. This is the lot at civic address is 1237 Howard Drive. So this particular application is looking to vary the District of Tofino zoning bylaw. Basically, the variance is to site a single-car garage sort of in the front yard and also a little bit in the side yard. So the applicant is looking to reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 7.5 meters to 5.5 meters and reduce the minimum required side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 1.1 meters. So because this is an accessory building, it is in the front yard, it must also conform to the same setbacks as the primary dwelling. If it was in the backyard, there's actually a significant reduction in required setbacks, but it's going to be in front of the house. The rear part of the house is, a large part of it is covered by a covenant, and then there's also a sort of a boggy, swampy area behind it as well. So this is the actual location of the subject property. It's along Howard Drive there in the Chesterton Beach neighborhood. This is a sort of rough site plan of what's proposed. The existing house is kind of the major structure there, and then the new proposed garage is the small rectangle in the top left corner. The lot line, the side lot line in question there is actually the kind of dashed line that's quite near to the edge of the garage there. It's not the further line, that's a measurement line that was drawn by the applicant's designer. So you can see also on the site plan just behind the house there's a boggy area, and then that other line there actually indicates the start of the covenant where there's no vegetation removal, no build zone. So this is one of the designer's renderings. The house exists already. The single car garage is the small structure on the left that is proposed to be built. This is kind of what it looks like right now. The house there, you can see currently the space that would be used for the single car garage is occupied by firewood crib sort of storage area. The single car garage would be a little bit bigger than that, but would occupy roughly the same area and probably extend a little bit further to the left of the picture, pardon me, so into the vegetation area a little bit more. Here's just another angle. You can see approximately where the single car garage is proposed. So we're taking a quick look at some of the criteria we use to, as staff, we use to evaluate these development variance permit applications. First criterion, we're looking to preserve the form and character of the general neighborhood. This is a residential neighborhood. Most of the lots have been developed as single-family houses. Many of them have accessory buildings or caretakers' cottages or those kinds of things. So this particular development is not really out of the ordinary for this particular neighborhood. Regarding the protection of the ecological integrity of the lots, the siting is proposed to be out of the covenanted area and away from the boggy area. There's a few other pictures that were included in the staff report that I think indicate kind of that behind the house there isn't really much opportunity short of significant design work and very much revamping the existing vegetation and existing landscaping to site it anywhere besides kind of where it is proposed. So regarding solar exposure, this isn't as important as it's not a habitable structure, but it will be in the front yard and have significantly more solar exposure than the more shaded, vegetated backyard. With regard to privacy, it's expected that very little intrusion will occur as a result of this. It's not a habitable structure, it's kind of a smaller structure. However, it is very close to that lot line. There's an existing berm and quite a bit of existing vegetation currently separating the two lots. However, the lot, I think that's just to the south, I believe, of that property is not actually developed yet. So it's a little bit difficult. One of the letters I think you received mentions that and talks about the potential future development of that lot and how the siting of this particular accessory building may influence that. Regarding views from neighboring properties, it is visible from the street, but it's not expected to compromise in any significant manner any of the views from neighboring properties. And then regarding flexibility in the design process, we have solicited input from neighbors through the notification process. So the notification happened on November 29th. We received actually more than 2 written responses. We should do the last one just before I made up this PowerPoint presentation. We had 1 phone call that was then followed up by a written response for 3 total written responses. Opposing the variance, most people felt that the lots in that particular area are fairly small and the setbacks are already fairly lenient, and that there wasn't a need to relax them any further. Just kind of worried about compromising privacy and the integrity of the neighborhood from their perspective. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to speak to them.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Law?
Yeah, I do have a question. I looked at the, I did have a look at the property actually, and the side setback does not include the roof overhang, is that right?
There's sort of accommodations within the zoning bylaw depending on what the structure is, but you can overhang a couple feet typically.
So so I looked at that, and it looks like to me that with the way it is drawn on the application, that with the overhang, it actually comes with about 16 inches from the neighbor's lot line, which is that big. And so when it said they're leaving vegetation, you know, in the writing and in the picture, the architect's drawing, it looks like there's quite large trees there. It gives the appearance that there's going to be a large buffer. And I found that a little misleading because, you know, 16 inches is not suitable for a large buffer that I can see. So those trees in the drawing would have to be actually on the neighbor's property, not the applicant's property. So I found that I did find that a little troubling. It's not a question, but it's sort of their question in there about the overhang of the roof and the setback.
Yeah, so the one thing that I would say about regarding the overhang of the roof and the setback, this would be something that would obviously be reviewed at the building permit stage, but the one thing that I think is applicable in this case is that the sort of allowance for an overhang to incur into the setback actually starts at the beginning of the setback. So it wouldn't be like the overhang is already in the setback, and so any further incursion may not be viable in this case. That would be something that I would have to kind of probably have a bit more detailed drawings from. We currently just have the site plan that addresses the setbacks, and I actually haven't seen any sorts of elevations or finalized architectural drawings regarding overhangs. But that is, yeah, something that may become a bit of an issue.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Perspectives?
Yeah, you know, there's, I mean, we have our setbacks for reasons, and in this case, I think some of the points that Councillor Ladd brought up are applicable in this case, and in just in terms of the ability to decide. I went and looked at the property as well, and familiar with it, and wondering in discussions, and I'm not an architect, what the driveway access in, if you know, if it could not be, the whole structure could not be shifted over to not even have to deal with the setback issue, and I, you know, I didn't have a measuring tape or anything there, but it occurred to me that you know, this variance, we have them for a reason, and the ability to infringe on those other properties, I was having difficulty accepting. So that's just my perspective.
That's fair, thank you. Others? Councillor Anderson?
Well, some of the variances that come to the district go to the Board of Variances, usually for, well, it's for reasons of hardship, and also some of the variances have come directly to council. Sometimes there's some view that there's some obstruction or difficulty in siting a building on a property, and I think that I don't see in this case that there's any particular difficulty or reason to go into the setbacks with it. I think with with some redesign, it's possible to fit a garage in with the existing buildings on the property. And also, I think in this case too, we probably received more letters opposing from the neighbors, and it's the reason we put it out to neighbors to find out what their feelings are about it. So just on for those two reasons, that the lack of support in the neighborhood and the fact that I think that it's possible to locate the building on the property without the variances, I'm not in support of it. So.
Thank you. Councilor, any thoughts?
Yeah, getting those letters all yesterday really kind of, I was originally leaning to it. I thought a garage would be kind of an easy kind of thought, but then I did also went and drove over there yesterday and kind of got a feel for the yard. It does seem like it's going to be quite up front, so I'm not quite supportive of it, I guess. So,
Okay.
and following this is kind of helping with that.
Okay. Any other perspectives? Anything different? All right. Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion, since I see where this is largely going?
We're looking at you. That's right. In case you're wondering.
I'll move that the recommendations provided in the reports not be approved by council.
Or can I just slightly reword that?
Sure.
Move to deny the request, or
Deny
the
the request.
development variance permit number 13-19, I think is the, yeah. Is that appropriate,
That's more
Elise?
straightforward.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
I'll second.
Okay, so it is moved and seconded then to deny the development variance permit number 1319. And do you need any more details in the motion, Elise, or that's enough?
No, that's
Okay.
sufficient.
Does anybody have any final thoughts on that? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. Motion carried. Okay, I think we're going to skip back in our agenda, if that's okay. We'll get Councillor McMaster, and Bob is here. So Pete, you can like rest your throat for a minute, or 10. Do we need a motion actually to formally vary the agenda at this point, or?
No.
Okay.
That's fine. I mean, by
It'll-
unanimous consent.
Yeah, by unanimous consent, we'll hear our second delegation then. Okay, then I'll welcome up Bob. Thank you for being here. And you have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation. And then we have a few minutes for questions, and then we'll move on. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much for adapting the agenda for my late arrival. Sorry about that. Thank you to Mayor and Council for the opportunity to provide an overview on the WildSafeBC 2019 program for Tofino and the larger region. Oh, I guess this is me. Where do I point?
It's this.
There you go.
Okay. So I'm going to provide an overview in the presentation that I hope will provide a sense of the community support, the scope of support. I'll talk about the sort of core mission of the WildSafeBC program, and I'll provide an overview of this year's wildlife activity in the region, and I'll talk about or provide examples of how collaboration is a key tool in the program in furthering education and community solutions. So in terms of my background, I've been able to work over 20 years in various capacities on the questions revolving around understanding our relationship with wildlife and how we can coexist. The challenge, the ongoing challenge is how do we share this landscape now and in the future? And So that central mission as framed by WildSafeBC is how do we keep wildlife wild and our communities safe? And in pursuit of that mission, need a broad base of community support. And this slide shows the support that came together this year to allow a 7-month full-time program where I could work with partners and collaborators on delivering this program. So I'll start off with an overview on the wildlife activity, and it's a year that I've come to think of as the year the fruit was abundant and the salmon were absent. So I think those were two major dynamics that played out this year in very dramatic fashion. So for bear reports, based on comparing to 2018, we were very much up, and I think because the bear reports are still coming in, we're probably double what we were last year. And cougar reports were down, but there were cougar reports in a number of communities several times this season. Wolf reports were up, and there were 2 serious incidents involving wolves that resulted in the death of dogs in the area. So this, and hopefully I can describe what this is showing. So 2019 is the red bars, and that November red bar, you could pretty much double the size of that now. So I did this graph in November 15. So the activity is still going on. And the big thing to notice in that November slot is that in the 4 years previous, there were 0 reports in November. So this year, our peak of activity started in August, increased through September, kept increasing through October, and increased through November. And you look at all those other colors, the peak was in July, August, and declined right through the fall, and with nothing in November. So a really dramatically different year this year. And so this shows 1 week in our area. But what isn't shown is that there were also in the same week activity in Itatsu and Makoa and Salmon Beach and Taistanis. And in terms of collaboration, I won't go through the list, but these are all ongoing working relationships that worked extensively with all of these collaborators this year, and which has been really exceptional. It's been quite a remarkable year for what we've been able to accomplish. And in terms of education and outreach, here's some sort of quick numbers. For these Facebook stats, I don't know what they really mean, but WildSafeBC tracks them. So reach was over 42,000. The likes since the program restarted last year have gone up by 250, and I made 50 posts. So I tried to post weekly information to give people following the page locally and visitors current information and education. That example of warp mapping, I found that people really find that useful. Gave out a lot of brochures and a lot of materials, WildSafe Ranger materials, attended markets, door-to-door, quite a bit, in all the communities actually. I worked with the vacation rental sector, information for the info centers. The BC Goes Wild weekend, Wild for Wildlife weekend was brought out 300 people. Bin tagging surveys, so I'll have a slide on that. That's where I go out the night before garbage pickup and I tag any garbage that's been put out contrary to the bylaw and the Wildlife Act. And backyard audits, so just working one-on-one with folks in their backyards, just looking at their particular situation and what we could do there if they were experiencing problems or didn't want to prevent problems. Spent quite a bit of time working with campgrounds, electric fencing, so we did 7 installations, and brayer spray workshops, provided wildlife and area signs in all the communities, also Highway 4, that traffic stop. Fair bit of media, ongoing media, and 14 community talks. So here's what that looked like. So sessions in the classroom and outdoors. That classroom session was a few minutes after the bear walked by the door of that classroom across the street. And working with the res and their field school with the kids, learning how to detect wildlife sign and thinking about wildlife habitat inside our communities. Here's the bin tagging surveys. So I did 10 surveys for Tofino and 6 in Euclid. And it's basically cover every street in town. And if something's out, it gets a warning tag. And it did see improvement as the season progressed. So that was the start of the season, and then things got progressively better. And actually working with bylaw and the Conservation Officer Service, we completely resolved 5 chronic repeat offender situations, which is very, very great to make that gain. Door to door, this was actually a block party in Millstream, supported by small community grants from CBT, but yeah, tried to be out and about in the communities as much as I could. And of course the markets and Yuki Days, the whole weekend, so there's the Salmon Enhancement Society, national parks, the res and Barb for wetland stewards and CBT. We all came together and delivered different things for all the people that showed up. It was a great weekend. Yeah, I find this particular event that people really appreciate that experience. So people come and spend an hour or 2 hours and just really thoroughly enjoy it, and they like the ability to corner Barb and ask all about amphibians, or Carl's very entertaining claws and paws talk, or yeah, people really seem to get a lot out of it.
So pardon my interruption, Bob. We've reached 10 minutes. Do you have a minute or 2 left, or what? We can consider an extension. You just have to do a formal motion to do that.
Okay.
A couple more minutes? Okay.
Sure.
Can I have a motion to extend the delegation, please? Thank you. Moved. Seconded.
Thank you.
All in favor? Thank you.
Okay. So worked quite extensively with First Nations this year, which was really great. And this was really quite a remarkable experience in that I received a wolf pelt to use in education, but of course that's very sensitive culturally and spiritually. So I requested permission from New Chalmouth Elders Advisory Group, and after discussion they did permit it. And prior to that though, Levi did a cleansing and prayer ceremony, which was really quite an experience. And it's part of that growing working relationship with with First Nations in the region. And then that collaboration with Bylaw and the CEO service, we worked a lot together this year, each in our individual roles, but supporting each other, and found really had some encouraging success. The subsidy program, so was able to pay 50% of the cost of 15 carts, 2 composters, and 7 electric fences. Some examples. And DECO cost sharing, so partnered with the ACRD and the waste management companies, and we bought and had these produced and helping put those on, as well as those chains and latches. And community talks, this was for staff training for Jamie's, and had more requests to do similar things. Bear spray demos, electric fencing demos, and signs. Hitatsu really got on top of their bins, and after a bear was shot there in the spring, and really did a remarkable job throughout the season. Fruit gleaning initiatives, so there's hopes that will, the Tofino Community Food Initiative will be successful in getting funding this winter for a regional program. And volunteers, had a great group of volunteers. And for the coming year, would like to ask for continued support from the district for a program in 2020. It's really essential for the program, and we'll continue working on building the base of support from the business community in all the communities. And there is an initiative underway right now that might see a pilot program, first pilot program in BC for an Indigenous WildSafeBC program. That's in the works, and that may come to pass this winter, and it will be focused here. So thanks very much, and thank you so much to all the funders that made this program possible. Continued support.
Thank you very much, Bob, and congratulations on a really effective year. I mean, learning that 5 repeat problem properties have achieved resolution, I think really goes a long way to showing us how effective it is to have a person and a program and support and all the education that goes with enforcement. So trying to achieve compliance before having to crack down with fines and things like that is clearly working.
Yeah, just being able to work one-on-one with people, like the intent isn't there to be a repeat offender, it's more, there's other things.
Yeah.
But you just have to work in one-on-one.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
Works.
Anyone have questions for Bob about the program? Councillor McQuaid.
Yeah, actually, thank you so much. This is so helpful. I'm glad to see that you're working with Leah at the TCFI. I had a meeting with her about the Glean Club that she wants to put together, and I think that's a really great initiative. I was wondering if you knew, or if there was any way for you to know what the vacation rental versus resident interactions were, and if they were leaned more one to the other side. Just because I know that it would be difficult to have those conversations that you're having with people again and again if you have a rotating cast of guests going through a property, and to what extent any vacation rentals are encouraging, responsible disposal, etc.
Yeah, so I've been working mostly with property managers as sort of a starting point. Have talked with a few individual operators, and it seems like as a sector there's efforts going on to educate their guests. So they have their little rule sheet, or they have some information, or it's how to really make that consistent and broader. And so we're actually working, the provincial coordinator and I are working on producing something that's easy to read and understand and more visual, that can go in all vacation rentals and B&Bs, that explains those issues. In terms of the breakdown, basically the bears, like at one time we had 4 bears in Tofino actively seeking garbage, and basically anywhere that it was, they were eventually finding it. So yeah, it's was right across pretty much most streets.
Thank you for that.
One last thing I forgot to mention was I did meet with Aaron about the hazard assessment and conflict management plan, and was very encouraged to hear that a lot of the contents being considered with the revisions or updates to the OCP. And I would really encourage that there's very detailed recommendations there as to potential improvements to bylaws and definitions that could be great tools for going forward into the future. And so hope, and if I can assist in any way with staff, I'd be happy to sit down with staff and go through those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of the questions I had actually, was around and what possibility there is, and I'm kind of looking to our staff as well, around working with the District of Ucluelet and the ACRD to bring some the bylaws all into some kind of consistent format, so that the rules are the same and that the fences are labeled the same way in all 3 communities across the peninsula. It seems like that would be, we did such a great job on the plastic bag ban together. But I think you're probably looking for direction from council at some point to really initiate that, or how you want to fit it into your work plan, or.
Yeah, right off the rattle, it seems like the kind of thing that we could work very well with our neighbors on, would have a benefit to the region. So it's, as was mentioned, it is something that's on our radar for bylaws that need to be improved. I'm not sure what the timing of that will be, but when we get to that point, it's definitely something where we would reach out to Ucluelet and see if we can find some kind of uniformity, so that the work that Bob is doing is made easier.
I have been in discussions with the ACRD on that very thing, and there is actually a subcommittee of the ESAC Sinhay Teachmas Regional Network working on that for domestic animals.
Right.
And again, working with the ACRD, bringing them in on that. So there is an ongoing working relationship now with the ACRD on any number of topics.
Right, that's great. 2 more quick questions.
Sure.
First, what, and this is again for our staff as well, I think one of the real benefits that we've seen this year is generally an increased awareness about this issue in the communities. And so I've heard more people talk about what they see in terms of what's at the end of people's driveways, and that when you do see a container spilled over in garbage places, I think people are naturally reacting and going, wow, that's not great. What do we do? If people see that, what should they do? I mean, should they phone bylaw?
I think that, from the municipality's perspective, and there maybe other avenues, but it would be contacting bylaw services. Yes.
Right, and just reporting something that's seen, and that I'm hoping would help you, Bob, as the WildSafe coordinator, to be like, yeah, that might be a household I need to go talk to.
Yes, and usually, like sort of the approach was, I would go, if I see it, I go and talk to the people, and then if it isn't resolved, like I flag it for bylaw, bylaw and their patrols goes by. If it isn't resolved, then they follow up.
Okay.
And then if, for whatever reason, if that isn't sufficient to resolve it, it's out again in a week. then it's trying to figure out what is the issue here, where's this breaking down, and so like staff housing is a particular challenge.
Right.
High staff turnover and high number of people living in a staff housing unit, or it's vacation rental, and so it's trying to figure out what are the causes of this situation happening and working on that. But sometimes it's just someone who doesn't care, and then it goes to bylaw, and then the CEOs, when they show up, it's a very different tone.
Right.
And definitely gets people's attention. So.
Well, that kind of leads to my final observation sort of question, which is just that I think this is a great example of how a municipality works with a nonprofit to achieve some of our objectives in a way that's actually a little more cost effective and kind of easier and more effective overall. And I know that you have had grant funding through the District of Tofino and through the regional district. And so I'm just saying this out loud, that in the next year or two or three, like where I see this going is we need to have a conversation about how to formalize a relationship or kind of roll it into something that just becomes an annual thing that the District of Tofino assists with, because it helps us and it helps you. And instead of having to come year after year after year asking for grants, that this just becomes kind of part of the, and I've made this same pitch to the regional district as well, and I think there's a conversation still to be had about how do the two municipalities and the regional district fairly sort of share the services, the cost of the service, but realizing that we're all benefiting from it. So I'm anticipating that you're going to make another request
Absolutely.
for 2020, and I know for me at the regional district table, I anticipate seeing a request there as well, and I'll look forward to working with you more on that. Yeah. Councillor Sear?
I just wanted to thank Bob, and your presence at our chicken social has been important. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here too, Ocean. Okay, so back to Peter. And we're going to discuss the zoning amendment application for Mackenzie Beach Resort and consideration of first reading.
So my next presentation for this morning is first reading, consideration of first reading for the zoning amendment application submitted by Mackenzie Beach Resort. I'm not sure why it says 691 Industrial Way up there, I apologize. So a little bit of background on this particular application. It was received March 7th, 2018. Permission to proceed was granted on July 7th, 2018. Since that time, the applicant has been working with staff, both myself and Dana, previous to me, to provide information regarding kind of exactly what the proposal is, what the site plan consists of, particular information provided by Dave Clough related to some of the environmental considerations around their application, and some initial discussions about community and contributions. So the actual location of the site is not at 691 Industrial Way, as was previously indicated. It's at 1101 Pacific Rim Highway. But typically the actual access to this particular portion of the site is off of Mackenzie Beach Road. So the proposal, there's a couple kind of components to it. Initially, or what the easiest way to describe what's happening is it's a zoning amendment or a rezoning of a portion of the property, so that the existing split zoning line matches up with the existing split OCP line. So basically on the property right now, it's split zoned between C5, which is a tourist commercial district, and A1, which is a fairly common acreage residential district. And it's also split designated in the OCP between the Mackenzie rural designation as well as the tourist commercial designation. However, the commercial zoning line doesn't match up with the commercial OCP line. So that's kind of one of the major goals of this zoning application is to make those two lines coincide. Along with that, this is facilitating kind of the redevelopment of the overall resort. There'll be a slight expansion to the campground, a bit of an adjustment of the locations of some of the sites, and we're also bringing the campground in conformance with the zoning bylaw. So the campground has existed for quite a long time. However, the property is zoned C5 and campgrounds are not a permitted use under the C5 zoning. I think there was some fairly thorough investigations done by the manager of community sustainability in 2014. The result was that whether or not the campground was legally non-conforming was somewhat inconclusive, but it has existed probably since somewhere around the mid-early 70s or perhaps even prior to that. So it has been treated as a legally non-conforming entity and granted business licenses under that. Basically this is a very fancy graphic proposed expansion of the commercial zone. So the two areas that are actually shaded in yellow would be the parts that are expanded to include the commercial zone. The black line that's kind of dividing the property almost in half is where the OCP divides the property, and then the yellow lines with the purple in between, or sorry, the blue, I guess, in between them is currently the commercially zoned area. The commercially zoned area would be expanded to include those two shaded areas with the yellow lines. The one other thing to note is that on the western portion of the property, there's been some accretion of land there. That's not currently included in the original C5 zoning, so we would be redrawing the zoning line to actually include that little section as well. So this is provided by the applicants in their original application, a brief map of the existing uses. You can see, I'm not sure, which one is it?
The bottom one. Can you just hold it?
It's not wanting to work for me, unfortunately, but basically the existing C5A1 boundary is marked approximately in the center, just to the right of the center of that diagram, and then the OCP boundary is on the far right. So again, we'd be moving that C5 boundary further to the right to match up with the OCP boundary and expanding the commercially zoned portion of the property. So you can see the existing uses. There are a number of foreshore camping sites, legacy foreshore camping sites. There are, I believe, 14 sleeping units, which would be 14 rooms for rent between the cabins that are shown there. And then there's currently Little Ronnie's Beachside Grill, as well as some retail lease operations, a print shop and a rental place for sup surfboards down below, and that's in the what used to be kind of the staff comm, and historically was a house building there. And then there's also the general reception and cafe, the area known as the general store, which occupies the main structure kind of in the center to the lower part of the property there where the swimming pool used to be. And then there's a number of existing campsites as well as existing RV sites on the property. So sort of rough breakdown of the existing uses. There's 12 cabins existing, but within those 12 cabins there's 14 tourist accommodation units, and so those are kind of the individual sleeping units. 24 RV sites, 26 foreshore camping sites, 23 forest campsites, restaurant patio, which is Little Ronnie's, as I mentioned, the print shop and sup rental stores in the area just below that. Then there's a reception building that has been renovated to provide guest amenities, and there's like a cafe, and I think there's some staff housing units associated with it as well as washrooms for the campground and those sorts of things. So the proposed uses, include 15 tourist accommodation units. So that's an increase of 1. There'll be 30 RV sites, 10 foreshore camping sites, 40 forest or walking campsites, licensed restaurant, leaseable retail, which already exists, mobile food cart, which would be an added use, events, which kind of already exist, but we'd be formalizing it through the zoning. And then the reception building with guest amenities, cafe, attached staff housing would also be formalized through this rezoning process. Again, this is kind of has been an ongoing conversation, so this is currently what has been proposed. There's been a number of different versions of this through the different conversations that staff have with the applicant. So one of the kind of important things, or at least staff feels an important thing to highlight, is that currently the C5 zone doesn't have a particular density regulation. Right now, the density of the site is approximately 82 units per hectare. That's including tent camping and RV camping and tourist accommodation sites. With the increase in size, even though there'll be a slight increase in units as well, the overall density will be reduced to 53 units per hectare. And then, yeah, the currently existing C5 zone does not have regulation on density. And then the C6 zone, so Bella Pacific Campground right next door, which is kind of where we've borrowed a lot of the zoning regulations from to kind of accommodate the camping side of this property, has a density of 45 units per hectare. So a quick look at some of the policy around these sorts of rezoning applications, starting with the vision to action. There's lots of language about supporting the economy, supporting Tofino's tourism economy, ensuring that the visitor experience is maximized. Improving pedestrian bicycling infrastructure, so there's some work happening currently to pave Mackenzie Beach Road associated with this application. There may be some other components that improve pedestrian and cycling transport. And the other kind of component to that is the mixed uses available on this particular property may discourage driving to town for other visitors from the nearby resorts on Mackenzie Beach. And the other kind of important components is that one of the major driving forces that the Vision to Action talks a lot about local beaches being accessible to the community through public access. Currently there's no public access to Mackenzie Beach from the north end of the beach, and something that's been discussed with the applicants is the potential of the District of Tofino acquiring a public right-of-way through the existing property down to the north end of Mackenzie Beach as a portion of this rezoning application. So the official community plan, coming down the level, the property, as mentioned, is split designated between tourism focus and Mackenzie Rural. This application is really only concerned with the tourism focus portion of the property. The tourism focus kind of encourages, as it indicates, larger tourism developments, resorts, hotels, those kinds of things to be within that area designated in the OCP. And there's 3 development permit areas that affect development on the property. Tourism focus is just a development permit area that covers the entire property. There's a foreshore area that includes 15 meters from the high water mark along Mackenzie Beach, as well as 15 meters extending into the beach zone. And riparian, there's a large swath of the property is basically bisected by Mackenzie Creek. So environmental concerns are in staff's opinion, a major component of this particular application as well. So environmental planning has been identified in the OCP as a very foundational component of the development that we'd like to see in town. 2 environmentally sensitive areas, as mentioned, are on the property, the Mackenzie Beach foreshore area as well as Mackenzie Creek. And one other kind of relevant portion of the OCP is that the OCP recommends avoiding placement of pathways adjacent to fish-bearing streams where possible. With regards to that, the applicant has done some extensive work with Dave Clough, who has indicated that he does not think that the proposal as it stands will be, or can be done in a way that does not negatively impact the ecology of the area. So a quick other map of the official community plan showing the split designation. Approximately half the property is within tourism focus and the other half is Mackenzie Beach neighborhood. Here's the development permit areas. The blue on the far right is the foreshore area, the orange is the tourism focused development permit area, and then the green area is the riparian area of Mackenzie Creek. The zoning, property is split zoned between tourist commercial and small holdings district. The C5 zone permits tourist commercial uses, resorts, hotels, those kinds of things, as well as accessory commercial uses such as restaurants. The proposed development, best way to accommodate it would be through a comprehensive development zone. So we're basically taking portions of the C5 zone as well as portions of the C6 zone in order to accommodate the camping as well as accommodate the development that's being proposed by the applicants. So here's the zoning. You can see the C5 zone is significantly smaller than the A1 zone and smaller than the tourism focus OCP area. So added uses to the new CD zone, most importantly is the commercial camping aspect, but cafes would also be an added use, mobile food cart, entertainment uses. Those would be basically written into the zoning bylaw as permission to host things like weddings or small concerts or other public gatherings. And self-service laundry facility, as well as potentially some other guest services facilities. Some other relevant changes include an overall density limitation, which is an important thing from staff's perspective, seeing as the C5 zone currently doesn't have a density limitation on it. There'll be a seating limitation, just a standard cap number is kind of what it has evolved into over recent conversations with with the applicants for both the restaurant and cafe, and then slight reductions in height permissions. Just so council is aware, this application has been, there's some complex aspects to it, and so it's been an evolving conversation, and should the application proceed, it is likely, also based on the OCP rewrite that's currently occurring, that maybe amendments to the currently proposed zone may become necessary. So just to quickly go through a few of the land use considerations, I've touched on a few of these already. Environment is a major concern. There's been a bunch of work that was attached to the staff report done by Dave Clough. A big component of the applicant plan is essentially a forced walk campsite area within the riparian area of Mackenzie Creek. I spoke to Dave Clough a number of times regarding this, both in person and on the phone. He has indicated that he's actually very much in support of this proposal. The reason being, he believes that the trails can be constructed in a way that if they're raised above the riparian area, they won't actually cause any damage. The floodplain area there, he believes, is also caused by a lot of incorrect drainage coming through both Mackenzie Road as well as Helen, and that has significantly backed up Mackenzie Creek over the years. And then he's also of the opinion that currently there are a number of basically unregulated trails and kind of dumping areas within that area, and by introducing more regulated use in that particular area may discourage those sorts of things. Wildlife considerations also a big kind of topic, as we've just heard. So things like garbage and recycling and sewage, as well as just generally the way people use the area for camping will be kind of an ongoing conversation with the applicants, between staff, and I'm sure with the council as well. Servicing, we've done kind of some initial conversations, very, very low level. As there hasn't, it doesn't seem that there'll be a major increase in sites or usage beyond what's currently there. My initial conversation with Ricardo, who's no longer with the district, was that he didn't anticipate any major issues, but we will probably be requiring a servicing brief from the applicants, and we'll go through a full series of referrals should the application proceed. Multimodal transportation plan. Because of its proximity to both a very busy tourist area as well as to the multi-use path, there's the potential for this to reduce the need for people to drive into town should they be staying at Bell Pacifica or Middle Beach Lodge or Mackenzie Beach or Tinwoods or any of the other large resorts along Mackenzie Beach there, given that there'll now be more services available in this particular location. Community amenity contributions, as mentioned, there's been a number of conversations. So these are, again, ongoing, evolving. But one of the major things that staff have indicated would be something we'd be very interested would be a public right-of-way, a public pathway to access the north end of Mackenzie Beach. The applicant was at the last staff meeting, or pardon me, council meeting, and showed some preliminary plans for a bus turnaround. And there are a number of other things that have been suggested. They have a copy of the community amenity contribution guidelines. However, many of the things that have been suggested are basically outside of those guidelines, and so they'd be at council's discretion. Traffic as well. This is something that I'm not sure exactly how it will be affected, but particularly in light of maybe the potential for the bus turnaround and some of the other proposed community amenity contributions, traffic studies will likely become necessary at a certain point in this application. And then flooding and tsunami risk. I believe I have a couple of maps that just show these are included in the staff report, but the front kind of portion, the area where there's been some property that's accreted over the years, is fairly susceptible to flooding. So this is, as I mentioned, there may be some amendments to the zoning. We may be looking at moving the setback further back in that particular area. The applicant has indicated that they may be interested in keeping a few tent campsites down in that zone, which may be appropriate, but any more infrastructure or foundations or more solid buildings would likely not be appropriate in that particular floodplain area. The entire property is within the tsunami inundation zone. Currently, the designated tsunami refuge place, nearest one, will be up Industrial Way. Again, that may be reviewed as there is kind of an ongoing conversation about the tsunami evacuation plan based on the work that Keith is doing. So that will be reviewed again through the referral process and beyond should the application proceed. So the options, we can grant first reading of the bylaw, grant first reading as amended, reject or refuse the application, defer or otherwise deal with the application. Staff has recommended that we move forward, but also acknowledge that there may be significant more work to do with the applicant to make sure that all the issues brought up are addressed adequately. So next steps, quick run through, we'll be going through a full referral process, probably have some more amended discussions. The idea would be to, should the application move forward, the next reading we'd have a confirmed amended contribution idea to bring back for council's consideration. Then move through public hearing, third reading, and any other things that we can happen before adoption. So that was a long one, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That's, thank you very much, Peter. No, it's appropriate that it's long because it is a more complex one. So, okay, let's start off with questions. Councillor Chalmers.
I really like the idea of the floating campsites. There was a couple of them in the maps that really looked like they were like right over the stream. I did walk it, the property with the applicant yesterday and kind of had a good feel for it, but just the concern of how close it is to the stream and people littering or what potential, like did you have any thoughts on that or concerns, or is that something that will be kind of addressed more as it?
Yeah, my understanding is the site plans that we've received, I think there was a couple attached as appendices to the staff report, have indicated that those particular sites would be selected with Mr. Clough as the QEP, and he would be kind of dictating precisely where they are. I believe he established a 10-meter streamside protection enhancement area, which typically is basically a no development zone. Mm-hmm. However, this entire proposal, or that portion of the proposal, relies quite heavily on Mr. Clough's expertise. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of other applications, provincial permits that need to be approved as well in order to actually realize that project. But my understanding would be that Mr. Clough would be there with the applicants as they're mapping everything out, and he would ensure that none of the sites are in a location that would compromise the integrity or the current integrity of that section.
Thanks. Thanks. Councillor Stewart?
Thank you, Peter. It's very comprehensive, and I'm learning with such a detailed report as I start making notes all the way through. If I just go down to your conclusions, it will often answer many of the questions that come forward, and so I don't have to do as much writing as I tend to do. So thank you. And so, I just, in that conclusion part of it where there's potential additional information that may be needed and the ones that may not be limited to, I fully support between the QEP, et cetera, and I would also say I would love to see included in that referral response, the development proposal, the water infrastructure questions that have come up quite regularly, and I would love to see that for sure. And all the other ones that were in there. The only question that I had, and because I didn't see it conclusively in the report, was surrounding staff accommodation and how that figures into the rezoning. And there was that, there are units of staff accommodation based on C5 and C6, and I started doing the math and all that. I was just curious if there's considerations around staff accommodation in this proposal.
Yeah, so currently the applicants on the A1 portion of the property have a temporary use permit to operate as kind of like a long-term campsite similar to Crabapple. And I believe they have been using that as staff accommodations. So the staff accommodation is not required to be on the property. However, they will require staff accommodations in the ratios laid out in the zone. Currently that kind of falls both with zoning and any kind of redevelopment that happens, but also falls a little bit with the business licensing protocol too. My understanding is that currently staff are housed either the staff accommodation units that are attached to what used to be the old pool building, which is the general store, and then there's also some staff accommodation units that are on the A1 portion of the property. There's like an old Quonset hut, and then they have just kind of in there, there's a number of trailers that have been placed there under a temporary use permit. Yeah, so, but that will be certainly something that is an important part of the zone, and one that will be kind of working with the applicant to make sure that those are provided.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow on that, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's
Just related to that is just the consideration of all the other uses on the property and the staff that requires too. So how does that, traditionally our C5 zoning, you know, staff is, the accommodation ratio is attached to the number of bedroom units available for overnight stays, but then all these other secondary uses occur and they require staff as well. So just to bear that in mind. Oh,
Yeah.
Zela, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
I will let other questions, I think that pretty much summed up your conclusions. But, yeah.
Councillor McQuaid?
Yeah, I think this is comprehensive and thoughtful, and the presentation that we had previously was the same. My concerns are very much, I'd be inclined to support. My concerns are very much in line with Councillor Steers. I'm interested in knowing exactly what the staff accommodation plans are, not dependent on a TUP. You know, what is the long-term plan for staff accommodations, especially if there isn't a renewal of a TUP, where do we fall there? Also, I didn't see, and I may be remiss in this, I didn't see any mention of a laundry building in the initial report. But it is here. Did I miss that? And that's entirely possible that I could have. But considering that, the camping events, etc., I'd like to move the proposal that we have an impact on the servicing and district and water and infrastructure, like moved into like absolutely necessary to look at, not just further down the road. I'd like to see that personally before moving too much further past second reading, if that's possible. Yeah, I think otherwise. Oh, and then we just had Mr. Hansen here. I'd be interested in knowing the impacts for wildlife corridors for the tent camping, etc. Moving forward, I think that like taking into account the streams, etc., is thoughtful, but I'm not sure how wildlife moves through that area, and I'd be interested to know kind of what the plan is there. Also, do you know what, just out of curiosity, the food cart, that was kind of like an out of left field, and I thought maybe interesting to examine based on forest camping, wildlife corridors, streams in the area, what the plan is for that?
Yeah, certainly. So I can only speak to kind of conversations with the applicant, but essentially they wanted to have like a food stand sort of thing. Like I think the vision for the property includes kind of people being able to come and get food and then be able to not have to stay in a particular restaurant area. So this is something that staff have kind of gone back and forth a little bit about as well, but there'll certainly be controls built in to that regulate kind of locations on the property where the mobile food cart can operate, hours that it can operate, those kinds of things as well. It's a little bit of a tough one because we've had lots of conversations over the years about mobile food carts in town and kind of food trucks, those sorts of things. So it is again something that, I mean, it may provide us an opportunity to start developing some policy for those kinds of things as well through this. But that's something that the applicant has indicated they're very interested in, but I don't have a lot of information about exact design or really what they're saying. But I would say that that's something that we would probably be placing some fairly significant controls either through business licensing or in the zoning itself, just to kind of mitigate any of the potential impacts that you mentioned.
Great, awesome. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks. Councillor McMaster?
Could you expand a little bit on the events entertainment use? The reason I ask is I know last year we had a few issues on Mackenzie Beach with impromptu concerts, which I don't believe were related to the resort, but just expansion onto the beach.
Right, so this is one that I had to look up as well. So I actually, there's actually a definition. Let me find it here. The entertainment uses is kind of what it's need. And in the zoning bylaws, it says, an entertainment use means a commercial social use providing for the entertainment of the public in theaters, restaurants, cafes, licensed premises, bowling alleys, amusement arcades, and pool halls. So my interpretation of that is essentially that it's a social use and entertainment use, a commercial one, so they're looking to make money off it, or they have the potential to make money off it. That happens within the restaurant or something like that. And the way the applicants described it is that they want to be able to host small concerts, they want to be able to host weddings, they want to be able to host essentially events. And so I'm actually not sure if our entertainment use definition will enable them to do all that. It's a little bit of a gray area, I would say, kind of within Tofino in general, as we have lots of weddings on the beach and they often are hosted by the various resorts. The entertainment use kind of permission, at least as it's defined in the zoning bylaw, doesn't specify anything about outdoor events, it doesn't specify anything about weddings. So currently that's kind of what what the applicant has requested is included in the permissions. And staff are all right with that, provided that it's an indoor thing and that it complies with all the other regulations of the restaurant and hours of operation, those kinds of things. However, it's been a bit of an ongoing conversation, as I've mentioned many times, so depending on what the applicant is really looking to get, we may have to adjust that, either create a new definition or within the permitted uses kind of add permitted uses that have very little kind of room for interpretation, and that we don't need to add another definition to our zoning bylaw.
Okay. Yeah, just these grey areas tend to come back and haunt us. So.
Yes, they do. And I was curious, following on that, under our C5 zoning then, what you're saying is that that kind of entertainment use is more restricted to the indoor, like a resort having a wedding indoors versus out in its parking lot.
So within the C5 zone, I don't think there are any permissions for the entertainment uses. There are permissions for hotels, resorts, motels, restaurants, conference rooms, facilities. And so when restaurants, or pardon me, when a lot of the resorts host these kinds of events, I think they would be considered as hosted within a conference room or something like that. However, it's also because a lot of the actual weddings occur on the beach, that's outside of our jurisdiction, and then it's sort of a private party that's hosted back at the resort. That might be something that we have to look into a little bit more, or discuss with our business licensing. I can't remember what Damon's actual title is. Business licensing officer.
Business license regulation bylaw.
It's on the regulation bylaw, yeah. So there'll be, to ensure, at least in this particular case, should they want to host weddings, and particularly should they want to host weddings on the property outside of the buildings, that may be something else that comes up. Again, that's probably something that I'll be discussing with the applicant, just to make sure that one of the things that's kind of come up with this whole application is that things have been changing a little bit with the applicant's needs and wants as well, and then as well as with us developing this comprehensive development zone, because it's a fairly complex zone. There's a bunch of different uses incorporated into one zone. We've been trying to get them as defined as possible and as organized as possible. But as the project has sort of evolved through discussion, there's kind of been a little bit of a shift of definitions and desires. And so that's one of the goals moving forward, should the application proceed, by the time we bring it back for a second reading, to really have those nailed down and say, this is exactly what the applicant would like to be able to do on the property, and here's the language that we've chosen that will enable them to do that.
Thank you. Councillors Anderson or Law? Councillor Law, you want to go first?
I just want to concur with Councillor McQuaid on having, I would like to see the wildlife corridor assessment, just to see where the animals are moving through there, if they're moving through there, and how it would be impacted. And can you talk a little bit about, I know it was in the application, the applicant's desire to restore the foreshore and work on Mackenzie Creek to improve the creek.
Yeah, so these have kind of been initial discussions that are associated with some of the construction, some of the redevelopment proposed as part of this rezoning. So my understanding is that particular section of Mackenzie Creek, there's a culvert that's too small for it, that's kind of inhibiting the flow of water and causing a lot of pooling. Also the fact that Mackenzie Beach Road is gravel. A lot of gravel has sloughed off the road into that creek area and has caused more pooling and spread of the actual creek bed. And so one of the things that the applicant has indicated that they would like to do is kind of work on the restoration of the creek. And that may involve removal of some of the gravel that's fallen in there, or replacement of that gravel with proper spawning gravel, other things that may be necessary to sort of define exactly where this stream is. My understanding from talking to Dave is fish get lost basically in that whole area, and so they'll be trying to, it's actually a surprisingly productive creek, and fish tend to get lost in these kind of like side chutes of the creek and end up in these holding pools with nowhere to go. And so one of the goals, as that's been indicated by the applicants, has been to kind of really define the way that creek runs. And then with regards to the foreshore area, the applicants have indicated that they're intending to pull most of the sites out of that area. There has been some discussion about pulling all the sites out of the area, but based on Dave Class findings, they basically couldn't fit the same amount of sites that they were proposing in the riparian area and also in the forest campsites that they're proposing. So my understanding is that they're indicating that they'd like to leave 10 of the sites within the foreshore area and just generally do a cleanup of that area. Staff's recommendation is to get essentially a QEP report for the foreshore area and kind of do a bit of an assessment of where it's at and any remediation proposals that are brought forward by the QEP, which would likely be Dave, because he's been working quite closely with these applicants, be made to occur in that particular area. That would be along the same lines of what we would expect for a development permit in that particular area. And so because those are sort of legacy campsites, they are already existing. They don't require a development permit in the same way, but we can ask the applicant to go through a similar process through this review.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Well, I have, in reading through the report, many things already mentioned were the things that jumped out at me, the sort of lack of emphasis on staff accommodation, the environmental issues that the site that we need to work with on that site, the creek and the foreshore areas particularly. I think in seeing how it's been used in the past, I've always thought the foreshore area was really impacted by the density of use on it. So I'm glad to see that the applicant is willing to bring that back, and I think that needs work. And the impact of all the secondary uses is really hard to understand. To what extent are they servicing the primary use of camping and tourism accommodation? To what extent are they attracting people to come and be there? And then just some of the definitions, really kind of, what's a cafe? When does it become a restaurant? Are they different? Those kind of things. I wonder when we put a label on something, what does it really mean? Mavoa food cart. In my mind, Mavoa food cart is best placed where there's a lot of people moving by it and not necessarily a place that attracts people. Otherwise, it may as well be called a cafe or a restaurant. So all those secondary uses, to what extent they're servicing the camping use, and to what extent are they attractants to bring people from elsewhere and increasing the density of the whole use, is as well as the entertainment definition around what is that, how far does it go, is kind of something that needs to be worked out a little better. So those are the things that jumped out as my concerns. I think in one point in the report, 250 seats associated with the food uses was proposed. I'm not sure if I got that right, but that seems like a lot. I'm not sure if we have a restaurant of that size, except maybe in a cluster of restaurants maybe, but so that was a bit of a concern to me. And finally, I was concerned about fire protection and just the number of fire pits and these boxes of some sort proposed with the tents. So just the number of those that might be throughout the whole property. And so that's those were my concerns.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll chime in now. So I definitely lean towards moving forward, and I don't have any problems with passing first reading. With respect to the amenities and the fact that some of the amenities that are starting to be discussed fall outside our guidelines, I'm very comfortable with that, in that they are guidelines, and I think this is an opportunity that we're ready to seize, and we've waited for a long time to have a discussion with the property owner near Mackenzie Beach about a public access down to the beach. So I support continuing a conversation on that. That's outside of the guidelines we developed in the past. I do share Councillor Anderson's concerns just around understanding the difference between on-site services versus off-site attraction. And I do remember that when Long Beach Lodge went through its rezoning process and the development process there, that was a big subject of discussion. And I think it bears really thinking about Mackenzie Beach and sort of the overall impacts to the beach in the same way that we have had conversations in this community in the past about Cox Bay. And so it may or may not be appropriate, and people will have different feelings about that, but I think that it's just something we need to bear in mind. And with respect to the foreshore side of things, I look forward to learning more about foreshore remediation. And I'll say, that what has happened at Cox Bay and Chesterman, I think, is informative for Mackenzie Beach, and we need to be looking at a much more natural process of foreshore softening and not going the hardening route that we've taken or seen taken on other beaches. I just don't support that approach, but that's something that's really difficult to do on a property by property basis. And so just thinking about the beach as a whole and erosion patterns and everything that's happening with the channelization of stormwater, and that's another thing to be mindful of, is how is stormwater leaving the property, creating a more formal beach access, how do we handle that so that we're not impacting either end of the beach in the way that we definitely have seen at Cox Bay, for example. With the creek, and I really, again, Peter, I think you did a great job of outlining how there's a lot more work to be done in terms of developing camping sites within or outside of Aspia next to the creek, and that the remediation opportunity is really important here too, and bringing the creek back to its natural patterns versus the obstructions that there are right now, not only for fish but just for water flow and the pooling that happens. I think we'll can see some really important remediation work done there. But it does also occur to me that in the last couple of years we've had a number of opportunities to work with property owners along this entire creek. So the Sharp Road housing, Sea Otter is a tributary that goes into Mackenzie Creek, and now this. And so I start to ask the question, when do we stop looking at an applicant by applicant approach to how they're handling riparian issues and start to look at a real creek approach and the opportunity that we clearly saw when Bob spoke here about what they've been able to do with the WildSafeBC program, and are there opportunities to work with Dave and with some of the nonprofits in town around more education and awareness about the incursions of dogs, of dumping your yard waste, of even the effects of dumping your camping water. You cook with your camping water and then you dump it on the ground. Those are things that can have impacts in terms of wildlife and in riparian corridors. And so maybe we need to think a little bit more broadly around there, and I think there's some opportunity for leadership there. And I think that's pretty much my list. But I'm excited to see kind of reinvigoration and redevelopment in the property, and I'm impressed with what's happened already. And I think that we'll see some really good discussions taking place as this moves forward. It's not going to move forward like at lightning pace or anything like that, but what does? So anybody else, any thoughts, any other questions?
There's just one quick one, and I won't dwell on it. Just in the tsunami emergency preparedness aspect, I know we've done a lot of work in that area, and that I just wanted to flag that. That was one of the things that I didn't get a chance to say, that I definitely would like those conversations to be had with, I know Erin and myself are well acquainted with that, and that we might, as we think of a more comprehensive approach on this, that those conversations with the applicant would be fruitful, let's say. That's all I wanted to add.
Okay. All right, if there's...
Then I'm happy to move.
Yeah, please.
I'll move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1273, 2019 be introduced and read first time.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final questions? Yeah, Councillor Anderson?
Oh, I just wanted to say finally that, and I sort of gave all my concerns, but I didn't give the things I support about the development. And I really like the mix that the proposal brings. I think it's offering a new, more diversified product in the tourism accommodation sector. That's always good for whatever, attracting tourists and offering something new. And yeah, I think it's an interesting proposal, and so we'll be supporting first reading.
Thank you. Councillor Wall?
I'd like to concur with Councillor Henderson. I was encouraged by this proposal.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call the question, and all in favor? First reading? Thank you. Motion carried. Thanks, Peter. Oh, okay, 2-minute recess. Is everyone okay with that? Just a short break.
Oh yeah, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's kind of this shocking stuff.
Oh, nice.
A lot of details were worked out. So now that we're sort of into it, historically, at a different point, it takes a while.
Yeah, we'll just meet you wherever.
Sure. Happy to.
to nail some form.
Boy. 2 minutes.
All this stuff. It's Kelowna, Las Vegas. Yeah, we're flying to Vegas, renting a car, and going to that one in Cascade. Tom drove through. He's never been. We've never spent time, but we were really looking for something to do between Kelowna and Provincial. It's just not the right time here. We got it.
I've only been to West Canada last summer.
Yeah, I think it's really people.
No, it's a pop. I think they call it. Oh, she's gone. She knows. A pop. Pop.
Kind of
Pop out. I don't know. It's like pop something. Anyways, it's just for holding on. It's just an easier way to hold your phone, and you can use it as a phone, like that.
Yeah.
How much time is it?
One night.
What?
Maybe it was a lens.
No.
8 hours.
Oh, okay, so it's just a hotel room.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get in the evening. But like,
Although it's getting harder to run.
Yeah, well, now that
a huge interest.
things are moving, I can.
I've been twice.
Oh, have you? Oh.
Yeah, so like it's cool to walk around. Because usually
Yeah.
I don't know how this burning to.
If you're not excited about having cards.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like call them. Yeah, for lunch a little bit.
Deny.
Now my nap was. Yeah, it's the cheapest way to and they were like, oh, well, when can we book a room? And I was like, come down now.
I got your second.
Just so grumpy.
I bet you said it's my middle beach one.
Well, no, yeah, what I did was I went to the email list, because I haven't updated my email list since the election with the substance, so I've got all the election contacts. When I send you that thing that's super polite about, hey, I need 200 words on whatever the option is.
Fed water? De-watered? Yeah, right. It gives Peter a chance to have a little break. How's your throat doing, Peter?
That's fine.
Okay. Now that you're into it.
Now we're rolling.
Now we're rolling. Okay, so we have the first reading consideration for the Tofino Brewing Company.
So yeah, moving right along, second first reading consideration for this meeting. This is for the Tofino Brewing Company, who are actually at 691 Industrial Way. So a little bit of background to this application. It was received February 6, 2019. Permission to proceed was granted on September 10th. And just to kind of revisit some of the concerns and questions that were raised at permission to proceed. They mostly, I think the main concern was just the general amount of seating that was being proposed. There was a bit of discussion on the total floor area for the lounge, and then there was a couple questions about the general rationale of the need to increase size and then increase the capacity of the lounge larger than what currently exists. So the location, the property is just up Industrial Way there. On the left-hand side as you're heading up the hill. The proposal is basically we're looking to amend a currently existing definition or a currently existing permission on the property. Right now, the existing accessory lounge is permitted to be 68 square meters and a total of 35 suites. The proposal is to increase the area of the existing accessory lounge to 111 square meters and a total of 70 seats. At permission to proceed, the original kind of application indicated that the size would be about 136 square meters. Since that time, there's been some revised plans. The applicant has removed some of the areas that were included that are actually not exclusively for the accessory lounge. They're also used for the manufacturing and transport. But they will provide access like to the bathrooms or to the upper proposed area of the accessory lounge. This amendment has been initiated by the applicant mostly to meet particular demand at a very critical service hours. So in conversation with the applicants, they've indicated that typically the hours between about 4 and 7 or so are their busiest times, and they often have a long waiting line of people that they're turning away. The Tofino brewery has kind of become a bit of a destination for visitors to the town, but what's happened is that a lot of the locals are unwilling to wait, as maybe some of the visitors are, and so it's actually hurt the local patronage of the accessory lounge. So to respond to that, the applicants have initiated this amendment application to try and increase their capacity at the location. So this is sort of an updated version of the proposal. You can see the shaded area there is the existing lounge endorsement, and I believe it's about 62 square meters or so right now. And then the total proposed would be just less than doubling that, so about 111 square meters. This is sort of the mezzanine showing, so the area of the brewery, perhaps some of you have been in the brewery, and if you enter into it and look to the right, there's actually a raised kind of mezzanine area that has been constructed that they're looking to include in the overall area of the lounge. So vision to action, just kind of referring to some of our policy documents around these kinds of applications. Talks a lot about support for local businesses and kind of a strong local economy comprised of a variety of different businesses, including industrial ones and kind of more service-oriented ones, retail-oriented ones as well. And then there's a strong emphasis as well on local businesses and sourcing products locally as well. Within the official community plan, the property is designated as light industrial, so it's part of the Industrial Way overall neighborhood and complex. Industrial uses are encouraged to locate there, as you might expect. So that's the primary purpose of the breweries is the manufacturing of beer, and then they fit in with the industrial use there. There's also economic policies within the OCP that really include a lot of support for local businesses and a year-round economy, and that's one thing the brewery has provided for many people is actually a year-round job, which is sometimes hard to find in this town. So the zoning, it's zoned industrial park district, which is kind of a very light industrial zone, indicated or generally used for wholesaling or light-scale manufacturing of products. So the industrial uses that are permitted is the brewery, and then there's accessory retail use that is also permitted within the zone. This particular property has the permission, there's no other property within the district of Tofino currently that has the permission for the accessory lounge. It was a definition that was created exclusively for this property under bylaw 1223 from 2016. And that accessory lounge sort of definition was based on some negotiations. My understanding at least was based on negotiations between council and the applicant, and was kind of initiated as a result of some of the changes to the province's liquor laws that then allowed microbreweries such as the Tofino Brewing Company to have these sorts of lounges. And lounge is actually the terminology they used as the province, and that's kind of what we adopted in terms of the definition that currently exists. So as has been mentioned, currently they're permitted 35 seats, 68 square meters for alcohol sales, service, and consumption. So one of the other kind of interesting policy documents that we have related to this application is the Industrial Way Review, which was a recently completed study in October, I believe 2018. I'm not sure where the 2016 came from. sorry for all the typos in my presentations this morning. Essentially what the Industrial Way Review kind of mentions is that they really want, or that the district of Tofino would probably be interested in discouraging the dilution of these industrial lands through commercial uses. So we don't want to start locating restaurants there or purely retail uses if possible. Industrial lands, we don't have a lot of them. They're quite important for the economy of the town. They provide a, I guess, more inexpensive parcel of land for which to run industrial operations, which otherwise might not be able to afford to operate in commercial zones or maybe other areas of town. However, the one thing that is within the Industrial Way Review is that accessory retail use is encouraged for a lot of the manufacturing operations, to encourage them to locate there. However, the retail portion, the accessory retail portion of these businesses should not exceed, or should be approximately 10% of the overall floor area on the lot. So the current accessory lounge floor area is approximately 6%, and the proposed has been brought down to about 10%, which is a drop from the initial proposal of 13%. What caused that drop was actually generally the removal of any extra areas that were also used for the industrial manufacturing purposes of the brewery. So within the Industrial Way Review, it talks about that 10% being floor area that's used exclusively for retail, and doesn't include floor area that's used partially for retail, also for manufacturing purposes. So a few of the land use considerations. Basically, we have parking, as always, as a consideration. One of the nice things about this property is they actually have a lot of on-site parking. So there's 28 total spots. 5 of those spots are earmarked for the industrial uses that occur on the property. One of those spots is earmarked for the staff accommodation unit that's located on the property, which leaves us with 22 that can be used for the lounge. As mentioned originally, the closest kind of ratio that we have as staff to figure out seating when we have 22 parking spots in this sort of a location would be to provide 88 seats. There was a bit of I guess many of the members of council were a little bit discouraged by that amount of seating, and so the applicant has reduced their ask from 88 seats down to 70 seats. Traffic is another thing that we're always kind of concerned about when we add uses or expand uses in these areas. So far, staff don't see it as a big issue. It's a fairly large turning radius onto Industrial Way. From I guess Kalamazoo, where it kind of turns into Pacific Rim Highway, and into the brewery parking lot. There's actually kind of a nice natural speed bump that slows people down. So traffic hasn't been identified as a major concern, but it will be referred to MOTI and these sorts of things should the application proceed. Servicing, as there's really no change in bathrooms or use, it's just sort of a general change in occupancy. An expansion of existing use, servicing isn't seen to be a major issue. Amending contribution, there's been some initial discussions. The applicants have indicated that they'd like to follow the community amending contribution guidelines. So we'll probably be, should the application proceed, I'll have something a little bit more firm in place to present to council at second readings. Impacts on other zones. What we would probably be doing, or what has been proposed for this bylaw, is to actually create a new definition. Currently, the accessory lounge definition includes not only breweries, but also includes distilleries and spirits manufacturers. So in order to not completely remove that definition and potentially leave it open for another business that might like to take advantage of it in the future, we've decided to create a new definition so that the existing definition, so that we won't have basically too many impacts on other zones. Or other properties, I should say, kind of applies to the same zone. And this particular new definition will be only applied to the property that the brewery is on. So one of the kind of important things that was discussed a little bit at the last permission to proceed was kind of the definition and limits of accessory use. Staff have used the Industrial Way Review, as well as the amount of parking and a few other things like that to kind of work with the applicants in order to understand what the proposal is and how it might fit in with the overall vision for the Industrial Way area. However, that might be, I'm guessing that's going to be something that's a bit of point of discussion with council. And then employee housing. This rezoning application doesn't actually include a housing component, but it's worth noting that the applicant has expanded their employee housing program, which is under a housing bylaw from the last rezoning application, to be able to house 2 more staff members. So again, just looking at a couple of concerns raised at permission to proceed. So seating, there's been a reduction in the amount of seats passed from 88 seats to 70 seats. The overall area has been reduced from approximately 13% to 10% of the floor area of the buildings on the property. And then regarding the rationale question, basically the applicant has indicated that during peak hours they're turning a lot of people away, and they'd like to not be able to do that if possible. So a few of the options: grant first reading of the bylaw, grant first reading as amended, reject or refuse the application, defer, otherwise the application. Staff are recommending the first option. And quick guideline of next steps is basically mimics the Mackenzie Beach rezoning application we just saw. So we'll go through the full deferrals process, maybe a bit more of amending discussion, second reading, move through public hearing, third reading, anything else that needs to happen before adoption. And I'd be happy to try and answer any questions if you guys have.
Great, thanks very much. Councillor McMaster, can we start with you? Let's go down the line maybe. Do you have any questions?
Is it approximately 10% or approximately 11%?
10.7%, so it's probably closer to 11.
Yeah, I was going to say that's in your report. I'd like to see you reduce the number of patrons, because I wasn't happy at 88. Just knowing what the liquor boards told me in the past. But I would tend to support it for first reading.
Okay. Councillor Chalmers?
Yeah, I'd like to support it as well. I like it about closer to that 10% in line with the industrial way. And any other issues with it? No other questions? No questions?
Councillor McQuaid?
I'm happy to support everything. I went back and looked at my notes from the previous discussions we've had, and this answers everything that was brought up and is comprehensive and thoughtful and ready to go.
Thank you. Councillor Steer?
I'm happy to support it as well. I did, of course, once again, there was in there the multimodal transportation component of it. The additional use may complement the goals of the MMTP and encourage pedestrian and bicycle use along the MUP. I wouldn't mind you expanding a bit on that, because from my mind of thinking that we are increasing, in my view, there will be more cars coming to the facility when you double the numbers, and I don't think all of them are going to come by bike or pedestrian. So one of the things, of course, that you may not be surprised by, that I would have concerns about when we increase that ability, there is also the potential for the increase in some potential harm, such as impaired driving and those. And so I wanted maybe some clarification on how you saw that in relation to the multimodal transportation plan, how you saw that as complementary.
Yeah, certainly. So the way that I guess staff were kind of looking at the multimodal transportation plan is the fact that the location of subject property is in quite close proximity to the multi-use path, and it's also set a little bit further out of town. So for people, this is kind of a similar discussion to what we had with the Gas and Go, where people who are looking to come and buy beer or even come and have a place to sit and have a drink, rather than getting in a car and driving all the way to Tofino Resort Marina or further into town. It's a little bit closer for a lot of people that particularly live in Ocean Park area, or that general kind of Mackenzie Beach zone, to potentially walk or ride a bike with the expanded use. Also just the conversation that I had with the applicants regarding the fact that many local people seem to be, they were very much less unwilling to wait. And would rather, as soon as they got there, go somewhere else. And so perhaps with the new expanded capacity, it would allow more people who live in the area to go there over other places in town, which would potentially precipitate more walking and more biking. I'll admit, though, it's not a particularly strong connection. I agree with you in that generally, increasing the capacity would increase people driving there.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I'm supportive of moving forward. The applicant, I see, has worked with the staff to reduce the number of seats and what's proposed. So I'm glad to see that there was some reaction to council's concerns at the permission to proceed stage. I have one question around the staff accommodation. I'm glad to see that they're adding to it and that we have an agreement. But is there anything in place that in the zoning or anywhere that says that they have to keep that staff accommodation, or it's required in any way? Because I'm thinking it could be taken away and the agreement wouldn't mean anything anyways. So I don't know if the agreement says that that must be in place, or it's just sort of they provided it and decided to have an agreement as well?
So my understanding is that it was provided, and then as a consequence of the original rezoning application, the housing agreement was put in place. And so I have to review some of the exact language in the housing agreement, but my understanding is that the housing agreement kind of necessitates that that particular spot remain a residential, you know, kind of unit. I think my understanding is that they have a fair amount of room for storage and industrial use, so there's more incentive for it currently to be used for staff accommodation so that they can retain staff as opposed to demolishing it and using it for other things. But my understanding is that the housing agreement is kind of our method of ensuring that it stays that use.
Okay, I'm always interested in when redevelopments move forward that gets sort of secured in place, because I've seen things, whatever, commercial places expand and then they remove part of the residential stuff that was hard fought for at the time of the original zoning and so on. So anyways, the only other thing I'd like to add is that I think the community amenity contribution discussion might add a few things, like perhaps public art or public art space being provided, maybe bicycle racks. All our transportation plan would encourage maybe addition of sidewalks or bicycle racks. Those kind of amenities might become part of the discussion. And the other thing, I guess, is maybe landscaping. I think Industrial Way in general provides great relief from the greenery around us, and maybe we want to change that. So anything that, those kinds of things that could be part of the amenity discussion, I would encourage. So that's it.
I think I hear Councillor Bart applauding. So.
Yeah, I'm happy to, I'll review the housing agreement and have a more definite answer for you. And then, yeah, I'm happy to raise those concerns with applicants as well.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, just on that, I think that point is clarification if it's required or just if it's there that there is a housing agreement in place. And given the overall tone of discussions Council's been having lately around commercial development, I think it bears consideration that maybe it's a requirement. Councillor Dwala.
I'm in support of first reading, for sure. A lot of my questions have already been answered, actually. And I was here at the original permission to proceed, so I'm aware of that, the changes. I'd be interested to see the MOT's reaction. I know that Industrial Way is a very difficult road to get out of if you're turning left. And so this would increase traffic somewhat, I expect. So as a general Industrial Way issue, traffic increases, then I'd be interested to see what happens there. And amenities, I'm also interested, it is alcohol, alcohol does have social effects on our community in many different ways, so it'd be interesting to see if there's any ways that amenities can go towards mitigating the negative effects of alcohol in our community, but that's just my own personal opinion, but I'm supportive.
Thank you. Okay. I don't have anything different.
I'll just add that I look forward to tightening up the definition of accessory usage, because that is definitely a grey area sometime down the road.
All right, thanks for mentioning that. Okay.
I'll move that the District of Tofino, I'm looking for the wrong one, that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1274 of 2019 be introduced and read a first time.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final comment? No? Yes?
I do have one.
Yeah, of course. No, that's fine.
And it's more just a statement once again, and as everyone may remember at our last council meeting, we started the process for a municipal alcohol policy, and we defined a clear direction for that policy, which I thought was very useful. And we also talked about the limitations of a municipal alcohol policy to address some of those larger issues around culture and responsible alcohol consumption and harm reduction in our community and region. And at some point we talked about maybe having a community forum, roundtables, whatever that might look like. And I would like to preemptively invite, I know the applicants are here, and to be part of those discussions, because in my discussions that I have with, I think they are very thoughtful and responsible in the community regarding this issue. And this is very preemptive because we haven't even come up with that, but I would love to have participate in that conversation when it comes.
Thank you. Okay, we'll call the question then. All in favor, first reading? Thank you. That's unanimous. Motion carried. Thank you, Peter.
Not done yet.
No, I know you're not done. Oh, you're not staying for the... It's okay. All right. Keep it going.
All right, so moving on to the housing agreement bylaw for Tofino Housing Corporation at 700 Sharp Road. So this is a reconsideration, I guess you could say, first, second, and third readings of this particular bylaw. I was not here at the council meeting where this was considered, but my understanding is the council raised a number of concerns about the agreement. And since then, staff, Aaron and myself, Bob, mainly have worked with the applicants to try and resolve those concerns. So background, basically the zoning amendment application was received July 10th. It actually has completed moving through the bylaw process. The housing bylaw is associated with this zoning amendment. The intent of this housing bylaw is basically to regulate who can rent the units in the development and the maximum rental fees payable. And so there's a lot of other kind of things associated with that. But mainly those are the two things that we're looking to do: define qualified tenants and limit the total amount of rent that's payable in these units. So at the November 12th, 2019 council meeting, the application was deferred, is my understanding. So this development is intended to provide affordable, attainable housing for the residents of Tofino. Typically, we have housing agreements associated with these. The information we have is based on the affordable housing needs assessment that was undertaken in 2015, so we're due to update that probably in the next year or two. And permanent year-round rental accommodation has been noted as one of the housing categories of greatest need here in the district, and that's what this development is, through this also, this housing agreement is intending to provide. So I know you guys have seen this, but it is worth just showing again. Essentially, this lays out the proposed rents for the units. And the rents are based on 30% of the overall household income. And the affordable housing needs assessment indicated that the median Tofino salary is approximately $23,826, and the average is about $31,066. Those were adjusted for 2019 based on inflation since 2015. So based on double occupancy, the one-bedroom units are in line with the affordable housing needs assessment, and then the two-bedroom units are going to be slightly above what the affordable housing needs assessment indicates is necessary. So regarding the agreement, there's been a few updates since it last came before council. Qualified tenant defined as a similar sort of thing, and each rental unit requires at least one of these qualified tenants to inhabit the unit, so that's kind of a very core piece of this entire agreement. There's some requirements to be considered a qualified tenant have been clarified, particularly around the amount of time that needed to be spent within the Alberni-Clackamas Regional District over the last 3 years. Maximum monthly rental rates and rates of yearly increase have been defined. There's been some language throughout that's been changed just slightly to kind of clarify the intention. One of the major things that I think was raised at council was the selection process for qualified tenants, that there may be potential for qualified tenants to essentially not be fairly chosen, even though they may have applied all at the same time. So essentially, to my reading of the selection process, there's kind of an initial lottery system where the applications are just randomly ordered and screened in that way. Then once the units have been filled, there'll be a waiting list maintained. That basically, whichever application comes in first will then be up top for the waiting list. And then, as mentioned, certain portions throughout have been edited for clarity. So this bylaw is 1275. Basically, it gives the district the authority to enter into the housing agreement in the form that's attached to the staff report. So this bylaw isn't necessarily the housing agreement itself. It's just giving the district authority to enter into the housing agreement. So there is the opportunity to change certain parts of the housing agreement after first, second, or third reading if needed. So the responsibility for following this housing agreement is going to be passed to Catalyst. Catalyst, as Council I'm sure is aware, is the developer behind the actual construction and management of the Sharp Road condos, or Sharp Road townhouses and condos, I should say. And so these responsibilities are not passed directly to Catalyst through this particular agreement, but this agreement is binding on the Tofino Housing Corporation, who will then, through their lease agreement, pass it on to Catalyst. So the options, I guess the concept of the bylaw is fairly simple. It's more discussion about the actual housing agreement that I'm sure will ensue. So grant first, second, third readings to the bylaw. Amend, grant first, second, third readings as amended, reject, refuse the application, or defer again. Staff are currently recommending the first option. So the next steps would be registration of any covenants, statutory right-of-ways, legal agreements as necessary. I don't think that that's a consideration in this particular bylaw, but if there are any other things that need to be considered, that will be brought up prior to adoption. And then we're going to be looking at adopting the housing agreement bylaw. My understanding is the zoning amendment bylaw was actually already adopted when I was not. So if anybody has any questions or comments based on the updated housing agreement, I'd be happy to try and speak to them.
Great, thanks, Peter. And thanks to Council for a good discussion last time. And I think it was good to get a few questions out and then have them ironed out. And I'm personally very satisfied with the way the amendments that have been made. I think they've addressed most of Council's concerns, if not all. So were there any questions? All good? Okay. Well, that makes it easy.
No, I actually, sorry. I was just reading,
Okay.
reading again. I just had a confusion about, I thought that I read, I can't find this last night, again. Is there a point at which you're taking the whole household's income or just the qualified person?
My understanding is that it works within the general household income, but there are some kind of exceptions to that, in that we really only need one qualified person, one qualified tenant within the household. The exceptions were to account for kids or elderly or other things like that who might not be working and who may not work as qualified tenants.
Right, so I may qualify by not making enough, but I'm just concerned that if I have a partner who puts me over the maximum allowable per household in my one bedroom, what happens there?
So my understanding is that at that point you'd be over the threshold of what's permitted, because through this we look at the entire household's income. I think part of the reason for that is to discourage people from, maybe one member of the household only makes a certain amount of money and the other member makes a significant amount of money, and they're living there when it's not necessary, or there's other people that may have demonstrated a greater need for those units. So that's my understanding of how the housing agreement operates.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, if I may, sort of on behalf of the
Please.
Tofino Housing Corporation, the idea has been to target families, couples, individuals within a certain income range for these units. So as Mr. Thick explained, it's considered on a household basis for that reason.
My consideration was taking, like what I was taking into was if your household is one in which you equally share financial responsibility for something, my ability to afford a lower income housing, a situation where I can pay half of everything and my partner's is different, it means that that is the only living situation that's viable for me in which I can pay half of the bills.
Right.
And it would not be for my partner.
Yeah, and the agreement doesn't contemplate getting involved in household finances and how they are allocated.
Yeah, no, I'm
spouses
just interested in seeing how that bumps people out of.
Yeah, and I understand the implications of what you're saying. It also applies, it's one of the reasons why there's stepped income bands too for the different sizes of homes, because it was contemplated about roommate situations. The same thing could be said. So one person qualifies and then gets a roommate that then, so how do you define that as a household if they're not married or not in a spousal arrangement or whatever, common law partnership or anything. So there's no perfect situation to
I was just wondering how it did.
No, it's a good question.
Approximate that.
Thank
Okay.
you for asking it. Okay. Any other questions? No? Would somebody contemplate the motion?
Yeah, that the district between agreement on bylaw number 1275, 2019 be read first, second, and third time.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any final comment or question? All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Great. I think you only have one more to do here. I like how you dip down below and then pop back up. Like the rabbit in the hat. Okay. McQuina Hotel.
Yes, so this is a development permit application that we've received. It's actually a development permit amendment application for the McQuina Hotel redevelopment. So we're considering development permit 0419, which was actually issued by staff on June 10th of this year under the previous delegation bylaw, which gave staff the authority to issue these downtown development permits. Since that time, the delegation bylaw has changed. And these downtown development permits must be issued by council. So the applicant has requested changes to the issued DP. Under the Local Government Act, essentially any amendment to an issued development permit has to again pass through the same process as issuing as would be issued for would be for an original issued development permit. Since the delegation has since passed from staff back to mayor and council, this DP amendment must now be issued by council. So the location of the McQuina is right at the corner of 1st and Main Street. I'm sure you are all familiar with it in a very light way, with no implications in that statement whatsoever. The changes that have been indicated by the applicant include mostly a change to the siding. That's the most obvious thing. Basically, it's going from red Corten steel to light gray corrugated steel. Overhangs have also been reduced, particularly at the roof of the building. As they've kind of gotten into some of the renovations, they've realized that a lot of the structural members of the building are actually not able to support the overhang as originally proposed, and it would be incredibly expensive and labor intensive to replace them all, and so they've actually pulled that overhang back a little bit to accommodate for the weakened structural integrity of the building. Some of the window, just the configurations and heights have been changed a little bit along the north elevation, the top floor. And there's actually been an exit stair kind of bump out added into the courtyard so that the exit actually conforms to the BC building code. That one was of quite little concern to the design review panel, as it's not really something that tremendously affects the public realm. It's a safety-oriented change. So this is what the approved design currently looks like. You can see kind of the ruddy red rust-colored siding. That's the Corten steel, and then the rest is this sort of gray cedar siding cladding the rest of the building. Also, there's an overhang kind of right at the top, right on the roof there, and then just underneath there, the top layer of windows changes a little bit, as we'll see in the next picture. So you can see colors change, materials change, the overhang's been pulled back a little bit, and the configuration of the windows has changed a little bit as well. It's just the same from another angle. This is the approved design, and then this is the amendments. So from a public realm perspective, one of the major changes I would say is the color change. There's also kind of the changes in overhang and window configuration, which may not be as much of a change to the average pedestrian. But yeah, significant change in color. The main reason for removing the Corten, my understanding at least, is that Corten steel is intended to rust and kind of have that red rust color finish. We get a lot of rain here, and the concern was that the rain runoff would start staining the rest of the building and potentially the sidewalks and out onto the road as well. And so that was the major reason for changing this. So there are no notification requirements for development permits, but the DRP met to discuss the amendments, and they gave their approval on November 19th. Anybody has any questions or comments? I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Design Review Panel.
I totally understand about the rust problem, but it's too bad because I really liked it. All right, if there's no questions, then maybe we'll just contemplate the motion.
I move that staff be directed to issue an amended development permit 04-19.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. You are relieved.
Your patience.
All right. So I am going to just take a note of the time, and I think we're doing okay. I'm just checking in with your stomachs. And everyone okay to go for okay. All right, good. Okay, so we'll move right on then into 2020 council member appointments. And did you have anything you wanted to lead us off with, Elise? Or
I don't. If council has questions, I'm happy to stand and take questions.
Okay. I don't have any questions. All right. Oh, actually, I do have a question, but I'm not going to make you stand for it. So we'll start off right away with the appointments to standing committees by me. And given that last year I made appointments and I have no reason to change them, do I really need to make another motion today, or no?
No,
Okay.
you don't.
All right. So
The option is
I have
there for...
no desire to change the audit committee and the volunteer recognition committee appointments, and just say thank you to the 4 of you that are serving on those. And then if we take a look at the select committees, we have a few vacancies, and we also have a new member of council who I have spoken to who is interested in both vacancies. So I would love to hear from others. We have a vacancy on the Community Economic Development Advisory Committee, and provided that we'll also be contemplating a recommendation from staff to review that committee. But I know that Councillor Law would be interested in sitting on that. And as well, the design review panel. He is interested in that. I'm confirming that by nodding with him right now. So, did anybody else have their eye on that?
I'd like to stay on the design.
Yeah, you
Okay.
you will. You can't get moved. No, these are just vacancies. These are
Yeah,
existing
great.
vacancies. Everything else kind of remains the same. All right, so in that case, could we please have a motion to appoint Councillor Law to the Community Economic Development Advisory Committee for a term ending the earliest of council appoints another council member ceases to hold office, or the date of an inaugural meeting in the year of a general local election. So
I'll move that.
thank
I'll
you.
second it.
Moved and seconded simultaneously. Any questions about that? No. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And then a similar motion to appoint Councillor Law to the design review panel for a term ending the earliest of the same set of.
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. All right. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Okay. And then did we want to talk about any other? Are there any other committee appointments that you wanted to discuss?
We had talked about the tourism Tofino one, but
That's going to come up next.
Oh, that's not where we're
so
at.
that'll be
Sorry,
separate. Yeah.
I'm ahead.
That's okay. Any other council, or sorry, yeah, council committee appointment changes? Everybody's okay? Okay, that's good. All right, so with respect to tourism, Tofino, go ahead, Councillor Chalmers.
We talked about me maybe taking up for you, but I would be more interested in maybe in April timing
Okay.
because that is an option.
All right,
Is
yeah,
okay?
that is an option. So can we bring this forward in April?
That's just fine. I just wanted to note that I actually made a mistake on the dates that are listed there. So the appointment
March.
ends in April 2020. That's
Yeah.
the upcoming deadline for Mayor Osborne's appointment, and then the next appointment would be
Right.
until 2021. So
Okay, all right,
I'm sure you noticed that as well.
Yes.
It wouldn't make sense.
no problem. We'll
Yeah.
bring that forward and
Okay,
just before the AGM. Okay, so Vancouver Island Regional Library, this is something that we must do every year, where we appoint a trustee and a alternate. And so Councillor McMaster is our trustee right now, and our alternate is
Me?
Councillor McQuaid, and I don't think there's any desire to change. You're
Like to
happy?
continue.
You're okay? Okay, so I'll move that Councillor McMaster be appointed as trustee and Councillor McQuaid be appointed as alternate to the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board of Trustees beginning January 1st, 2020 for a term ending the earliest of council appoints another council member ceases to hold office, council member is removed for a cause as provided under the Library Act, or December 31st, 2020.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, and so then Elise had written in her report around the contemplation of looking at CDAC and the Tofino Recreation Commission as two bodies appointed by council that probably are ripe for a bit of a review in terms of their alignment with the district's strategic plan and purposes, and just a chance to talk with those committee and commission members as well. So you see the recommendation before you. Did you have any questions, anyone, about that? Did you have any comments you wanted to make, Elise?
No, I think I've had conversations with individual council members who sit on those bodies. Happy to answer questions for those of you who aren't familiar. But conversations have also been had at both of those committees.
Yeah.
So it won't be a surprise to anyone.
Okay. Good. Great. Somebody want to make a motion?
I'll move that staff be directed to consult with members and conduct a review of the Community Economic Development Advisory Committee and the Tofino Recreation Commission to determine alignment with the district goals as expressed in corporate planning documents, including council's strategic plan.
Second.
Thanks. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Yes.
I lost something with the select committee.
Yep.
And it's too late now that we made a motion, but we had talked about maybe me taking over for the emergency program executive committee.
Yes.
Did I just lose my chance?
No, we didn't. No, not at all. We can go back. That's okay. Yes, so the Emergency Program Executive Committee is myself and Councillor Steer. And so I had a conversation with Councillor Chalmers about actually stepping off and then having her move on because of her really strong interest in the area, which I'm very happy to do. So unless anybody has any other perspective. So Elise,
It would be, sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we're just appointing Councillor Chalmers to the Emergency Program Executive Committee for a term ending the earliest of 1, 2, and 3 in place of Mayor Osborne.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so Councillor McQuaid just moved that. Second.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? All right. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Chalmers. Have fun, Councillor Steer.
Just in terms of you are chairing the committee, would you take that responsibility, or?
You guys will figure it out at your next meeting. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. All right, so then we're going to move into the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes, and we have minutes for receipt from the meeting held December 2nd.
Move receipt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And then we'll just handle these recommendations one at a time. So the first, that staff be authorized to continue to pursue value engineering items identified in the report titled Wastewater Treatment and Conveyance Report Update, dated November 26, 2019.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions from that? Okay. All in favor? Thank you. And then the next recommendation, that staff be authorized to undertake a pre-qualification and tender process as soon as practicable for the construction of the wastewater treatment plant and conveyance system upgrades. So, thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And then finally, that staff be directed to focus a municipal alcohol policy on public health and safety considerations for events on municipal property. Moved and seconded. Any final comment or question from that? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And then design review panel minutes from the meeting held November 19th.
Move receipt. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions that came out of this? No. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And minutes from the Emergency Program Executive Committee meeting that was held on the 25th of November.
Move they be received.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in. Any questions? Sorry, I'll just ask first. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And then there was another meeting that took place on November 29th. Were there, and here's a motion to receive those minutes.
Or move receipt, sorry.
Thank you. Move receipt and second receipt. Were there any questions that came out of that? Okay, I did have a question. I just have to now catch up with myself. So let me just find it. Sorry about this. Because I wasn't at that meeting. And there was some discussion around high ground private property locations, and I just wanted to state, because I wasn't at the meeting too, that I hope that conversation is not cut off. Like, it's not a recommendation to never talk about that again.
Which conversation?
around the identification of high ground on private property.
Happy to speak to it
Please,
a little bit.
thank you.
So the committee did discuss how to proceed with these two sort of parallel plans that are being undertaken at the same time, and this question around private property. And the committee recommended to the EPC that private property locations be identified in the risk mitigation plan, but not in the current evacuation plan.
Okay.
And so that was the compromise that we worked through as a committee for now. And so as you can see, the conversation will be ongoing as we make updates to our evacuation plan in the future, as it's a sort of an iterative process. We can continue to make better evacuation plans as things change in Tofino, and the tsunami risk mitigation plan will note that private property locations are something that we need to consider moving forward, and at a very high level, with no conversations being had quite yet with those property owners.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a closed door.
Definitely not.
Okay, great. All right, any other questions that came out of the minutes? All in favor of receipt? Thank you. Motion carried. And we have the Voluntary Recognition Committee meeting minutes from November 22nd for receipt.
Move receipt.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any questions? All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, under bylaws, we have the District of Tofino Building Bylaw Amendment number 1256.01 for adoption.
Move adoption.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final questions from this? No. All right, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, so now we get into the business initiated by council members section, and we're going to have a series of updates, and we'll start off with the council town hall meeting that we held on December 3rd in alongside the budget open house. And first of all, I just want to say thank you again to our staff for organizing that afternoon, and I thought overall it was a very successful event. I really enjoyed the format, but we couldn't have done it without you, so thanks for making the room look great. And we'll just, who would like to lead off, and then we'll just do a roundtable of kind of impressions overall. And Councillor McQuaid?
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to. I was really, again, if I can echo the sentiment, that I'm extremely grateful for the work that went into it from our staff, and the willingness to put yourself out there into the community and talk to people, I think is one that we all accept as council members, and I was glad to see it embraced, and whatever form at the town hall, it was really great. I really appreciated the opportunity to sit and speak with I felt like a large number of people came from our community that I wouldn't necessarily have the ability to interact with, and the format being what it was, that it was a situation in which I could sit and speak and hear those members of our community in that style around a table was really great. I think some of the expectations were that people were going to come and speak at council, or that council was going to be in a position to attempt to persuade or make a point about something, was one that was kind of immediately dismissed. When we were sitting around a round table, being there as a council member and being open to hearing what our community had to say and not taking any particular viewpoint, except that I was a conduit to which to bring this information forward, was a great format. And I think that it really put people in a position where they recognized that I was there to listen and to bring forward their concerns, and not necessarily to adjudicate or to persuade of my own particular ideas or thoughts or opinions. It was great. I felt connected to the community in a meaningful way, and I look forward to the next one. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Chalmers?
Yeah, I echo everything Councillor McQuaid said. I also found I felt very supported from the staff. Anytime I kind of felt I was in over my head a little bit when it came to technical stuff, there was always a staff member like right there that jumped in and sort of clarified a lot of facts for me, which was great. Since then, anytime I've run into anybody that I saw there, I've kind of asked what they thought of it, what we could do better. And a couple of things that sort of have come up is I think for all of us trying to understand the flow, and then when we did the sit down, the 5 to 7, some people didn't quite get that, sort of that was happening. And then a few other people didn't feel that they could interrupt. I know at my table I kind of had a few people that were there for quite a while, which is great. I got a lot of information from them. But at some points they were just kind of competing with each other. And I kind of became aside. So maybe a bit of managing flow amongst the tables with us, and maybe encouraging, I mean, even amongst ourselves, having a way to continue it. But I thought it was really great. I heard a lot of different views. And it was also nice for people to be at the table with other people with different views and them to hear each other's opinions, but I don't think we get a lot here. So I do like the idea of doing it more often. Thank you.
I'm going to suggest like a time clock, and then you just wham on your
Speed dating.
Thanks. Sorry. Councillor McMaster?
Yeah, it was the usual cast of characters that tend to come to these meetings, so I think I knew most of them. Thing like I had one person who was complaining about a flooded basement, which she felt was ignored by Public Works or the engineer, so I passed that on to the CAO, and he's looked into it, which is great, and let her know that the CAO has looked into it. And we were applauded, council staff were applauded on our vigilance on vacation rentals, and basically we're told to continue on that, because, and South Chestermore was mentioned specifically.
Anything else?
That was basically it.
How'd you like the format?
Format was good, I'd just like to see more people.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Councillor Law?
I enjoyed the format mostly. I did have to excuse myself from some pretty long and difficult conversations. We got kind of sucked in. But once I figured that out, I enjoyed that there was, you know, I could meet people. You know, one fellow was worried about walking and not being able to be seen at night. You know, anything from that all the way up to you know, how do we preserve large tracts of land. You know, it was very, very interesting. So I enjoyed the format. I enjoyed the people. Most everybody that came to talk to me was very encouraging, and came with a lot of interesting ideas. It was great.
Great, thank you. Councillor Anderson?
I thought there was a great improvement over the previous open houses that we've had. One thing, just the venue itself, not having it in council chambers, I think gave it a whole different flavor that is kind of more part of the community that we are reaching out to, rather than the community coming to council. So it just gave it that little bit of a spin. Also, there was a lot more room for conversation in a larger room. The stations of the different departments and the budget displays weren't so pushed into a small space, so I think people took more time going around that part of the display, the presentation. And then I thought the round tables kind of worked, but not perfectly well. Nobody would come to my table, so I had to take Britt's table over. Not exactly what happened, but yeah, there were times when I did sit alone. Maybe I should think about that. Anyway, yeah. So and then so just the way the people had conversations. Sometimes two councillors ended up at one table, and you know, had to move around. So that whole idea of the flow and understanding how the round tables might work better, I think it was a good format to do that. I think you have those one-on-one conversations, and yeah, so it partly worked, it partly needed something around getting people to flow and move around. So I don't know if it was perfect, but it was, I think, better than just sort of moving around the room. Of course, I heard lots about the current issues, about transit, about taxes, about people with fixed incomes worried that they'd be taxed out of the community. I heard the flooded basement story and the problems on 4th Street in general with the flooding next to the school grounds. I used to live on 4th Street, and I know that that street was not well built, and at one point it had a sinkhole and collapsed. And so there's something that I think needs to be sort of moved ahead maybe in the budget cycle there before things get worse. Yeah, so and all the other thoughts I think were reflected in what the staff put together from the input. But yeah, I enjoyed it.
Thanks. Councillor Steer.
It's interesting because the cast of characters that were referred to, I know many of them, and usually I'm having this town hall in the produce aisle of the co-op, so it was nice to have a new venue to have that conversation. I did enjoy the format in the sense that having staff available for when we needed them. Thank you, Nyla, because many were directed into your direction. So that was, and it was also nice to have the ACRDCA out there. I thought that was because we knew that there, so we were preemptive, I think, in thinking that out, and that was very helpful. So I would love to see continue the ability to engage in that conversation. I would love to, and I don't know how, to figure out a way, because it is quite a few of the regular cast members, as you were saying too, and I don't know how to reach out to engage some of the people that we normally don't see at these venues, so that I know all of the, I should say all of them, but I do know a lot of the opinions and positions of the people that were there. And I would like to hear maybe a more rounded, maybe everyone thinks that way, but it would be nice to find ways to encourage some other sectors of the community to come out.
Thank you. So I agree that the format worked really well, and I really enjoyed the kind of team approach that council had and that the staff had, and the way that we could pass people back and forth, that when we got detailed technical questions we could refer them to you, the staff, and that when staff got questions that were more political in nature they could refer people back over to us to talk to us. And I think that some thought about the how to better manage the roundtables, and I don't know if it's discussion topics or setting it up differently, and we don't obviously have to make decisions today, but I would appreciate some more thought about how to handle that. I think that the real value in what we did there was the face-to-face contact with members of the community who often, I think, feel that they can only write us or come to council meetings or talk to Tom in the grocery aisle. But what's really important about that is my ability to hear from somebody and then say, yeah, you know, I just heard this from somebody else right before you, which was different. And just to have people go, right. So I might not think that spending money on the cemetery is a good idea, but somebody else thinks that's really important and they were really glad to see it. And just being able to remind everybody that that's the whole purpose of these open houses and town hall sessions, is to hear all of the different kind of perspectives and feedback that we got. It is no surprise to me that there were a lot of people there who are property owners and are taxpayers, directly taxpayers, and so obviously they showed up for a budget open house. And I heard a lot of very positive feedback about how transparent it was and how they really appreciated the detailed information, and that they were able to ask any question that they had and get an answer from the staff person in charge of that department, including having the CAO from the ACRD there, and he is happy to come back in February, which is when we plan to do our next budget open house. And I think that this is actually a format that would be really great to get into maybe once a quarter. And if we were able to conduct that kind of session with staff and council 4 times a year, I think it would just open up some of the communication channels a little bit more and help us develop a bit more trust in certain parts of the community. But not only focusing on budget, also inviting maybe discussion around certain topics that we are really looking for feedback for, that will draw in other people. So, you know, you hear food carts and things like that. Those are the things that sometimes people have really strong opinions on and would want to be a part of shaping that kind of conversation for staff and council to consider. I know that Councillor McQuaid, she specifically invited certain people to come to the open house, and I really appreciated that, to say, just because you don't pay a property tax bill doesn't mean your voice isn't important, and that we need to hear it. And so that, I think that's a really great example of leadership and how we can all use our connections to invite different types of folks to come to these things. I would say overall, there definitely was a strong theme that I heard around concerns around the tax increases and just all of the services that we need to be providing, and that some people feel we want and some people feel we need. And a sense of, frankly, fear and anxiety about not being in control or knowing where this is going. And so the more we can do to explain how the 5-year financial plan relates to the current year and how that relates to the other taxes that come on the property tax bills, I think it's work that we're much better at doing than we were before, and that we need to continue to do. And being able to talk to people about why their plans are important and how it is our intention. Of course, fiscal responsibility is so important, but that we're here to take care of the entire community and to take care of future generations and not just today. And think about maybe some of the absences in the past of thought that are now catching up with us, that we just simply feel that we really need to take into account. I heard quite a few interesting ideas around tools for municipal revenue, and a lot of questions around like, why is it always coming down to property taxes? And so that did lead me I did contact UBCM right after the open house, and I asked directly, like, what is the plan with the Strong Fiscal Futures Report, and where are you taking this? And the answer was, well, Mayor Osborne, we've actually just struck a committee. The UBCM has struck another special committee specifically to deal with that report and kind of bring it up to date, and then within the next 6 months, bring it directly to the province. And it's going to come to the UBCM meeting in September. So they'll have a new paper for the delegates to consider there. And they were not surprised at all that I contacted them, because they said this is a conversation that a lot of mayors and other elected officials are contacting them about that municipal revenue tool conversation. So that was definitely directly inspired by some of the stuff I heard at the open house and the town hall meeting, and I really appreciated it. So, yeah. Any other thoughts after you've heard everything else?
Just one.
Yeah, please.
One more. I really liked, and more than other open houses, I felt like there was a lot more conversations going on between the people that came as well, with coming up with ideas and commenting on things and being exposed. Some maybe you're opposed to something, but then you change your mind because you heard other people's opinions on it. So I thought that was a great thing. And also, I guess one of the things that surprised me a little bit, I heard more support for paid parking than I've ever heard before as part of a revenue source. And I don't know how widespread that is, but it's something that, when you mentioned alternative sources of revenue and ways revenue might be shifted to support some of them, and those came out of just the conversations people were having with each other, not necessarily with a council member or a staff member.
Right.
So that was good.
Yeah, a lot of questions about municipal sales taxes. Councillor McQuaid.
One of the things that I was also really grateful to be there for was to kind of put policy language to like public chit chat, to have people there that maybe didn't have the exact kind of municipal policy words for things that they thought were necessary. That, talking to people about kind of split tax assessment and things like that, the impetus to be like, well, how is this moving in our community? What about this? And saying, oh, that is something we do talk about. So guiding people in their feedback forms to say like, oh, when you want to talk about split tax assessment, like when this vague notion that you have about taxing people appropriately, it's called this. And so like providing the right language for the general public was really interesting, because a lot of the ideas that we talk about here are out there at other levels, but without that municipal language around it. So it was nice to connect with people and talk about to reinforce that we are having those discussions, and to tell them what that looks like, so that next time that they see an agenda, they're saying, oh, that is something that I'm interested in, because the language can get kind of murky, I think, sometimes, and directing people and saying, like, this is what you want to look for. I did have 2 or 3 people say, I wish there was like a follow this button. And, like I'm interested in all the environment stuff. Can I get just an email about when environment things are coming up, or like a flag or a notification, or and I think that speaks to like the diversity of interests in our community, that people are interested in affordable housing, and if they knew every single time that was the discussion,
So I do understand that that's just paying attention to council agendas and reading them thoroughly, but I did see that the interest was there, which I haven't seen a lot among my cohort and younger before. So it was great.
Thanks to our staff for putting together the written feedback on the strategic plan. Did anybody see anything that surprised them, or were there any things that people mentioned that you felt were not in the strategic plan that came up? Mostly.
The only thing that surprised me was that somebody is completely satisfied with our library.
I can tell you who that is.
Don't change it.
I think I know.
Thank you.
What didn't surprise me is that there were support for things and then directly not support for things, which is always the case. But okay, all right. Well, thanks, everyone, and thanks for your full participation.
Can I step out for a minute?
We will have a coastal agriculture roundtable update. Yeah, from Councillor McQuaig. Thanks for going.
That's me. So the Coastal Agriculture Roundtable was held in Pruitt. This is an offshoot from the implementation of the Alberni Valley Agricultural Plan to increase food security. Heather Shobe voiced a concern and created, I believe, the coastal addendum to include kind of like this diverse coastal community that has a different farming, gardening, and food security plan. So one of the recommendations from that was a coastal agriculture roundtable. So that gathered together kind of all the vested partners in the community, like organizations, foundations, businesses, volunteer groups that could meet. So this particular roundtable was kind of the the seed, pun intended, to discover if there was a need for a committee. So a lot of, there were presentations kind of from TCFI, the Urban Farm, Ucluelet Local Food Society. There was representations from the Indigenous communities regarding historical and traditional and cultural food practices. And everybody kind of presented their little piece of the pie. And the overarching goal was to discover if there was a need to work together, what would be any project priorities, and what resources all of these groups would have to share together. I was glad to be there. I think that there definitely is municipal input that could be had into any roundtable, any kind of committee that was formed. I don't personally, it is my opinion that it wouldn't be necessary to have a seat on the committee. I think it would be great to have them come and present to council or to ask for guidance. I was glad to be there to say that, you know, municipalities can help you, you know, with startup funding, or, you know, to direct resources, or to provide, you know, administrative support. But as a whole, I think that this group is incredibly motivated and very, very well attended by a diverse group that would move it along without council being specifically on the committee. So it was great. I'm glad to see that it's forming. I think it's really valuable. I saw a lot of people there that had moved from being interested gardeners to vested food security experts. That was a really, really interesting progression from literally, like, they called themselves granny gardeners to being people who were just very concerned about providing food in perpetuity for their communities. So yeah, very great to attend. I'm happy to support them in whatever way they would request, but I don't think it would probably need a council commitment to the committee. Thank you. Any questions?
I was away, but that reflects very much the work that's been done in the past, and yeah. So, will there be a report coming out of that meeting?
I have the minutes, and I'm happy to forward to any interested council member. They are looking for any recommendations. There is a community gardener or agriculture kind of
Agrologist?
No, they're looking to send somebody to school. So they're looking for recommendations of anybody that they might be able to fund for like a community gardener position. It is quite an expensive program.
And it is also quite an intensive program. So anyone who has any recommendations, I'm happy to send you the entire package. It was quite comprehensive that followed from the meeting. But they are looking for recommendations. So that was the only thing. Thanks. All right then. Councillor McMaster, Vancouver Island Regional Library.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting meeting. First thing of note is the library board is going to revamp the library scorecards that you might have seen, which are quite colourful but quite boring in the sense they'll say Tofino Library has so many members and so many books were taken out and that's it. So they're trying to make it a bit more qualitative, so there's actually something meaningful about each community and each library, which may be a challenge for Tofino Library. And then the rest of the meeting was spent discussing digital content of the libraries. 40% of the library's budget is spent on digital content, and I was kind of aware of some of the issues with book publishing and who got what, but it was quite horrifying to say for someone like Macmillan Publishers, they don't allow a digital book to go out 8 weeks till after it's been published, and only one copy. So for VRL, which has 427,000 members, you get one copy of a digital book. Amazon Kindle and Amazon Audible don't allow any access by libraries to any of their exclusive content, and there's lots of other horror stories. So there's the feeling that this is leading into, people that have money can buy the book or whatever, and those that don't have money may never get access to this. So there's going to be a bit of a campaign from the library board towards provincial and federal to try and sort this out. So I fully expect to see us getting a request for a letter of support to be addressed to various people, and I would certainly be in support of us trying to do that. The last thing is, this is the first meeting I've attended where at least 3 or 4 people have come up to me and said, oh, you must be getting excited about getting a new library for Tofino. So it's definitely on the radar, but I don't know whether that actually means anything. And I'd like to recommend that we invite the library board to come up in the spring to have a look at possible sites up by the community hall, if that's what we're going to do. I'm really adamant that we have to keep the pressure on the library board if we're going to get a new library, and the more that we can say here's some land and go to it, the better chance it will have it happening.
Okay.
That's it.
Thanks. Great. Very interesting about the digital access piece.
There's lots of horror
Wow.
stories. Yeah.
I'm not a digital reader, so I don't really think about that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And there's a lot of people that are digital readers just
Yeah.
because they've got cognitive difficulties,
Right. Yeah. Huh. That's super interesting.
It's interesting that, in the past, some of the greatest creators, supporters of libraries have been like the huge industries and the Carnegies and things like that. And it makes you wonder about what sort of corporate citizens the digital giants are.
But I have some sympathy. I have friends in the publishing world, and it's tough getting a book out there published and making money off it. So I can see the resistance, but I think there has to be some sort of solution. It would at least be nice to see everybody was on doing the same thing, rather than each publisher having its own idea.
Really interesting. Thank you for the update. Okay, so regional district. So one of the things that's become clear to me out of the transit discussion going on in the community is that I can do a better job of bringing updates from the regional district to this table. And so what I wanted to try was a monthly, kind of just a verbal update, and we can change this if you see fit in terms of frequency or format, about kind of some of the things that are going on at the ACRD table that directly affect Tofino, but also that are maybe just of interest to you as members of council. So I might have a little more to say today than I could normally in the future, and I really invite your feedback. So what I thought I would do is just pick up some of the highlights of what's happened in November, this past month, and then speak to a couple of things that are going to be on tomorrow's agenda, and then we'll be doing this again in January. And so first of all, just to talk briefly about November. So November is when we do our board elections, and the vice chair and the chair of the board are elected, because it happens once a year, just like we appoint a library trustee once a year. So I was re-elected vice chair, and that means automatically the vice chair assumes the position of chair of the regional hospital district. So runs those meetings, but also takes the lead in all of the planning meetings, capital planning meetings with Island Health. And something that I'm really interested in because of the conversation going on in our community around replacing the Tofino General Hospital. And so having that contact with Island Health is something that's really good. Specifically what's taken place this month that is of interest to Tofino in the area is that right now First Nations are not part of the regional district's garbage and recycling curbside collection program, and so they have to contract separately to a commercial provider to get garbage pickup and recycling pickup. And the regional district staff has been talking to WildSafeBC and has now reached an agreement with them that we can invite Uclueletha and Tsuut'ina First Nations into the recycling program, and they'll be covered under the WildSafeBC agreement, so they won't have to pay for curbside pickup in their communities. That's not the same with garbage, but garbage still remains a service that has to be paid for separately. But that's a really great step forward for the First Nations to, especially for Tsuut'ina, in my opinion, because they're not a treaty nation that has a seat at the regional district table, and yet we are able to now provide a service to them through the local government that previously wasn't available to them. So I think that's a really positive thing. The second thing that's related a little bit to Tofino is that the regional district's electoral areas, the 6 electoral areas, have decided to submit an application to UBCM looking for funding on the housing needs assessment. And that is something that, as you know, I think we're required to do, every local government is required to do every 5 years. And so we did one about 4 years ago and are kind of coming up for needing to do one again, in which our staff has been talking with the District of Ucluelet about doing together, because there's a lot of sense in doing this together. But Area C, Millstream, is part of the peninsula and wouldn't necessarily be included in that. So the discussion that took place at the board table was, if they're successful in getting funding, can Area C kind of hold off on participating and apply a little bit of that chunk of funding into what Tofino and Ucluelet hope to do together? And right now in our 5-year financial plan, it's scheduled for 2020-2021. And so that's the kind of what I have been pushing a lot more, and what Mayor Noel from Ucluelet and Mayor Minions from Port Alberni is more staffs working together on projects that can be done regionally. So the childcare assessment is another good example of that. And so the Regional District Board has had a really good conversation with Marcy when she came to present on childcare. And other things that the board does are, kind of not really directly locally applicable, but they often have content that is helpful for me in decision making. For example, transit fare review is just conducted in Port Alberni. So the city of Port Alberni has a transit system, and then there's a custom transit system in the electoral areas. So BC Transit conducted a fare review looking at the differences in how the fares were established, and then came to the board to say, we recommend that you change the electoral area fare structure so that it fits the city of Port Alberni. So reading that report gives me a chance to see what are the principles that a fare review is based on, and how would that apply out here on the West Coast as we move forward. The regional district had a great presentation from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure on different projects on Highway 4, mostly between the other side of the island and Port Alberni, in particular in Cathedral Grove. So there's some movement that's going to be going ahead with improving the parking and traffic flow in Cathedral Grove, including the possible construction of a overhead pass for people to get back and forth. But if things worked out and they can find the money to do this, to actually have it almost like a canopy walkway, so like working with the trees to have people walk up and be able to push strollers, and it would be wheelchair friendly and everything, and then come over, and so it would be almost like an attraction as part of the provincial park. So who knows what will happen there, but that'll make things better. And then another area that's been really tough for the regional district lately is around cannabis production in the electoral areas, and the differences between legislation that governs how cannabis is treated as a crop and can be grown in agricultural land reserve, which we don't have any ALR land out here, but it's obviously a big thing in the valley. And as the District of Tofino representative, I actually have a vote on planning matters that affect Clayoquot Sound, So I don't vote on matters that are electoral area of like Bamfield or Cherry Creek or somewhere like that. But if there's an application or a zoning bylaw amendment that takes place in Clayoquot Sound, then I get to vote on those. And that's because of an agreement that the District of Tofino has with the ACRD, where we pay an extra $7,000 a year into that planning service that enables a vote on those matters. And so that's been a really interesting discussion to go through with the electoral area directors around cannabis production. And don't forget that there's that little tiny piece of land between the southern end of the District of Tofino and the northern end of Pacific Rim National Park that actually is regional district. And we don't ever really think about those lands, but that is the local government that has jurisdiction. And so it is important to me to have a voice in what could possibly take place on those lands. There are also applications that occur out in Clayoquot Sound, and so a really current one that we'll be dealing with tomorrow is the Clayoquot Wilderness Resort, and they have applied to the ACRD to construct staff housing, and so they need to do an OCP and zoning bylaw amendment to accommodate staff housing. And so when that happens, the District of Tofino actually gets a referral from the ACRD, and our staff views it and looks at it and then gives feedback. And so Peter got a chance to review this, and I've seen your letter in the package. and one of the big concerns, of course, always is parking. So as development occurs out in Clayoquot Sound, where do clients park their cars in Tofino? In this case, CWR has a private parking lot, so it doesn't impact public parking in Tofino like another proposal might. And so Peter gives, that's the comment, yeah, we're satisfied because this is taken care of. And so that's the relationship that occurs between our staffs, and then as elected officials at the board, we view all of that, just like we do when we look at referrals that come back from various agencies when we do our zoning bylaw amendments and other things here. Not much else, I don't think I could say. Tomorrow we will consider the transit establishment bylaw with the successful completion of the alternate approval process. And what will happen after the bylaw is adopted, if it is indeed adopted, is that the regional district staff will next work with BC Transit to confirm a placement of the West Coast Transit Service on their priority list for transit expansions. The ACRD already has an agreement with BC Transit, so what this is it's an amendment to that agreement, and so those negotiations need to take place. The route needs to be finalized, the schedule needs to be finalized, the fares still need to be finalized, and there's still room for conversation there. BC Transit then conducts a competition for a service provider, so they'll go through an RFP process. Bus stops need to be planned, and then an implementation date or a start date gets set, and that would not be until fall 2021. So this is a 2-year process to finalize all of that and have conversations with other potential partners. Just like Councillor Steer and I last night just started a very, very high level initial conversation with the school district around the late bus service, and that'll be a conversation that gets picked up by the regional district staff talking with the school principal and the staff at the school district office in Pearlbury. So that's it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
A little
Councillor
detailed
Anderson.
question. The infrastructure for a transit service, the bus stops, the pullouts, is that also funded through property taxes or the tax structure that's proposed? Or is that something that BC Transit funds separately?
So no, it's not contemplated through the service, as far as I understand. And if that's something that the regional district, the municipalities, Parks Canada, everyone will have to have those conversations. And so April's been our staff contact on that, and we've had a number of bus pullouts constructed in the last while through resort municipality funding, as well as through some of Ministry of Transportation's own funding. And I don't know if there's any other sources of funding. I'm looking at Nyla. If you know offhand, yeah, okay. So, the District of Equal would have to contemplate that for their area, and I think there's a very important conversation to happen with Parks Canada at this point too, because obviously the bus service would have I think a huge benefit for the park, but it needs a safe place to be able to pull off the highway, particularly around the First Nations communities and where people, and the parking lots where people are likely to get on and off. So, good question. Anything else? is that too detailed, or is that like about the right, does it feel okay? Okay. Okay, good. Well, then we'll continue that. That's super. Okay, so we have one final piece of business, and that is brought forward from the last meeting, and that's the ADICC, the consideration of resolutions. And if anybody had any initial ideas, we still have another month to finalize this, but now would be a good time to bring anything forward that you thought was particularly important. I can start off by saying the one thing that I really thought about, and this is another reason why I contacted UBCM, was to really make a point about that conversation around municipal revenue tools. And I'm still of a mind that there could be something in this that provides support to the direction that UBCM is taking with the province, but makes it very clear to the province that this is a conversation that really matters. And by enabling us to bring that to the floor at ADICC, I think it could spark a really helpful conversation. So even if in the end it's sort of a moot point, i.e. they've struck a committee to deal with this, I think that the conversation we need to have with our colleagues and other local governments is an important one. So if you agree, then what I would do is kind of work towards some resolution wording, and I'll talk to some of the executive at UBCM too to find out kind of what's helpful to them, but also very purposeful for us as a community, particularly a rural community, and dealing with some pretty big infrastructure deficit and new infrastructure coming up that's contributing to this feeling of that we have experienced amongst our property owners.
I would strongly support that.
Okay, all right. Then I will bring something to the January meeting. Okay. Anybody else?
I don't think, it was somewhat facetious, but there has been discussion, and I don't know, about the whole resolution process.
Yeah.
And I'm looking over at Councillor McQuaid about some reform, and if I don't know, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, well actually I am, if you had any thoughts about pursuing that, and if this might be the appropriate venue, or how much weight was behind it?
I definitely have had a few discussions about how to make that happen, and I think that I might run a long game plan, but I'm happy to talk to you about outside of council chambers. But I don't personally see coming forward with any resolutions this year.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I would encourage you to contact UBCM too and talk to some of their staff about your ideas. Okay, great. Anything else? Okay. Then that brings us to the end of our business and time for question period. And Andrew Bailey from the Westerly News is sitting here. He always has questions for us.
That was riveting.
Riveting.
It's not so much about the Tofino Council, but it totally counts because it was brought up during the meeting. The ACRD meetings, I've heard a rumor that they're going to start publishing those, like the video of them.
Oh, yes.
Have you heard this? Like January is what I've heard.
Thank you. So yeah, currently the regional district does not video its meetings, and the board has directed staff to bring in the equipment to do that, but I don't have a start date. I don't know a start date.
Okay, so like, so I guess like the process has been, like they're going to do that?
They are going to do that.
Because being a reporter on the West Coast and having those meetings in Alberni is tough without the video, because I'm not driving to Alberni. And there's that huge millstream thing happening tomorrow, which is massive, and I can't go.
Yeah.
Or can I lobby you to lobby them to ensure that the video
talk about that
the video happens?
Yeah, and actually it's a good question too, because it just has come up everything again with transit around communication from the regional district altogether, and so I've initiated some discussions with the staff there around how can we better bring the news of what's happening at the regional district to the West Coast. With its seat of government in Port Alberni, it is challenging to expect people who live, I think, in the West Coast to have a strong understanding of what's going on unless they, maybe if the regional district itself is more proactive in its communications. It's something we need to see.
It would be appreciated. It would be 100% appreciated. Did you all get my email about your Santa letters?
Yes.
That's all the questions I had. Good meeting, guys.
Councillor Helen Poon from Port Alberni, do you have any questions for us?
No, I don't.
Did you enjoy watching our council meeting?
Yeah, I did enjoy it though.
Good,
Yeah.
that's great. Okay, well, I'll have a motion to close the meeting. etc.
Move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91 ABC and of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent, personal information about an identifiable individual who is being considered for a municipal award, employee relationships, and consideration of whether an item should be closed to the public under conditions of the Act.
Okay, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. It doesn't take too long.
My computer won't show me. It's a doozy. It's a doozy.
I'm going right here. Okay, so what we gotta do is organize a big campaign.
Oh, I'm in.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm gonna change it from the inside out.
Okay.
You know,